Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.XFiles. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. October 15th, 1992. Recorded testimony of Dr. Mail Petrov, former senior laboratory technician, Soviet Research Facility, 7 Alpha. My name is Dr. Mail Petrov. I'm 71 years old, and the cancer in my lungs is moving fast. The doctors tell me I have 6 months left, maybe less, and that's fine. I'm tired. I've been tired for decades. What I can't allow is to die without telling someone, anyone, the truth. I've lived with this secret for 43 years. It has ruined my sleep, broken my mind, and shattered any hope I once had in the goodness of mankind. I haven't known peace since the winter of 1949, buried deep beneath the ice and snow of Siberia. What happened there was sealed off by concrete, buried by bureaucracy, and erased from official history. The Kremlin made sure of that. The records, destroyed in 1953. The facility, filled in, sealed shut. The people, silenced. Most transferred to gulags. Some turned up dead. All except me. I ran, disappeared, changed names, moved from city to city, hiding under forged papers like a rat in the walls of my own country. I never stayed in one place too long. Never slept more than 3 hours at a time, because after that, they'd come, in my dreams. And believe me, I've learned the hard way. They're waiting, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back. Back to when the world still made some kind of sense. Stalin's paranoia had grown into a monster with 1,000 eyes. Every whisper, every shadow could be treason. People vanished overnight. Fear was thick in the air, like smoke. That same year, the Americans formed NATO. We detonated our first atomic bomb. The Cold War had begun in full force, and both sides were desperate for an edge. Any edge. There were rumors, strange ones, about the Americans. The CIA had started some secret project. MK Ultra, I believe they called it. Mind control, psychological warfare, human endurance experiments. The Soviet leadership couldn't afford to fall behind. We had to match them, experiment for experiment, horror for horror. That's when Directive 74B came down, straight from the Kremlin. The code name, Somniva, from the Russian word for sleepless. The official objective, test the limits of the human mind under continuous sleep deprivation, sustained by chemical stimulants. But the truth behind the directive was darker. If we could keep a soldier awake, we could keep him killing. If we could keep an enemy awake, we could drive him insane. I was 28 at the time, just out of the University of Moscow, holding degrees in both chemistry and psychology. The GRU, the Soviet military intelligence, recruited me, not because of my politics. I was never a loyal party man. My family was bourgeois, a mark against me. But I had what they needed: expertise in neurochemistry and a deep understanding of human consciousness. That made me valuable. The location, chosen for Project Somniva, was Research Facility 7 Alpha, remote, isolated, roughly 200 kilometers northeast of Novosibirsk. It was so deep in the wilderness that it didn't even appear on civilian maps. Originally, it had been built in 1947 for the Soviet biological weapons program. But by 1949, it had been converted for psychological research. Officially, it was an agricultural station studying crop yields in subarctic conditions, a laughable lie, but one that kept prying eyes away. The facility itself was a fortress. Designed to withstand even a nuclear strike, it was built into a hill and reinforced with concrete and steel. Most of it lay underground. 17 labs, sleeping quarters for over 60 staff, and the real heart of the project, a cluster of airtight observation chambers, each one fully sealed, soundproof, and designed for long-term isolation without any outside contact. You could lock someone in there for weeks, and the outside world would never know. I arrived on December 3rd, 1949, flown in aboard a noisy military transport plane. The pilot touched down on a makeshift airstrip, just a slab of frozen earth carved from the tundra. The wind howled across the ice, and the cold, God, the cold, it sliced through my standard issue coat like it wasn't even there. The thermometer read 37 degrees Celsius, but it felt worse. As I stepped off the plane, I saw the entrance to the facility, a squat steel door embedded into the side of a snow-covered hill. Nothing above ground gave away what was hidden beneath. Just that one door, like the mouth of a buried monster. Waiting for me was the project's director, Colonel Dmitry Volkov, a tall man, broad-shouldered and hard-faced, with a stare like a loaded gun. His name was already infamous, ruthless, efficient, and reportedly hand-picked by Stalin himself. He wasn't a scientist. He didn't pretend to be. He was there to get results. Volkov didn't shake my hand. "You'll be briefed inside," he said. "Follow me. Don't speak unless spoken to." I obeyed. We passed through a series of steel-reinforced corridors, each colder and dimmer than the last. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The walls were painted dull grey. No windows, no sunlight, just concrete and silence. I remember thinking, this isn't a research facility. This is a tomb. And I was right. He was a weapon, simple, direct, and merciless. A man forged to eliminate problems, not solve them. Colonel Volkov's presence alone could silence a room. His pale, icy eyes scanned through people, not at them. There was no curiosity in his gaze, no warmth. Just a cold efficiency that suggested emotions were a luxury he had long discarded. When he spoke, his voice was dull and effectless, like a man reading off a grocery list, not preparing to lead a human experiment. "Comrades," he said, standing beside a large schematic pinned to the wall, a detailed blueprint of the observation chamber. "We are going to push the human mind to its breaking point." He paused only to shift his pointer to the ventilation system. "Studies show that 7 to 10 days without sleep causes total psychological collapse. We intend to double, even triple that. Our target is 30 days, awake, alert, and functioning. This will be made possible with compound S47. The stimulant," Volkov explained, had been developed by the Chemical Warfare Division. It was unlike any amphetamine we had seen. Traditional variants gave short bursts of energy, but they came with crashes, periods of mental fog and extreme fatigue. S47, on the other hand, was designed to bypass that entirely. Its structure allowed for a steady state of cognitive activity, at least in theory. Lab tests on animals had shown disturbing success. Rats remained awake for up to 3 weeks. They displayed only minor behavioral abnormalities, restlessness, twitching, slight aggression. But humans are not rats. We didn't know, couldn't have known, how differently the human psyche would react. Some thresholds, once crossed, offer no return. The 5 subjects selected for Project Somniva were political prisoners. Their crimes didn't matter, if they were even real. They had been chosen because they could disappear, and no one would ask questions. Over time, I managed to piece together fragments of their stories, not through official reports, which were vague by design, but from small conversations, brief observations, whispers in the cold halls of the facility. Subject 1. Alexei Volkansky, 34. Once a respected officer in the White Army, captured during the waning days of the Russian Civil War. 8 years in labor camps had carved deep lines into his face. He was tall and thin, with a shock of prematurely grey hair. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone who had spent nearly a decade in hell. He rarely spoke, but when he did, there was a calm finality to his words. as if he had already made peace with the idea of death. Subject 2. Ivan Kov, 29. A Ukrainian nationalist accused of organizing anti-Soviet resistance. Thick-necked, broad-shouldered, he looked like a man carved from stone. His hands bore the rough scars of long hours working machinery or breaking rocks. Unlike Volkansky, Kov remained oddly cheerful. He cracked jokes with the guards, grinned through the daily indignities. "What's one more stupid experiment?" he said once. "Maybe they'll turn me into a superhero." Subject 3. Dmitry, Petro. No relation to me, though the name stirred a strange discomfort every time I heard it. He was 31, a former Orthodox priest, arrested for preaching without state approval. The party's campaign against the church had been brutal, and Dmitry bore the evidence. His left eye clouded with scar tissue, his fingers trembled constantly, even at rest. But his voice was steady, calm. He prayed under his breath sometimes. That soft whisper seemed to irritate even the toughest guards. Subject 4. Boris Morozov, 26. The youngest of the group, once a literature student at Leningrad University. His crime, distributing decadent Western poetry. He was thin, almost frail, with skin so pale he looked half sick already. He kept to himself, fidgeted nervously, and often seemed on the verge of saying something before swallowing the words. Among them all, Boris seemed most afraid, not just of what we might do, but of what he might become. Subject 5. Sergei Knitov, 38, former factory foreman, accused of sabotage after a series of equipment failures at his plant. No real evidence, just bad luck and the wrong politics. In Stalin's Russia, that was enough. Knitov was methodical, quiet, the type of man who solved problems with lists and routines. I watched him once disassemble a heating unit in his cell with nothing but a spoon handle and reassemble it perfectly, just for something to do. On December 10th, 1949, these 5 men were escorted, hooded, restrained, into Observation Chamber 3. The chamber was a sterile steel and concrete box, 6 meters long, 8 wide, 3 high. It was built not for comfort but for containment. Each man was given a military-issue cot bolted to the floor. There was a plain metal table in the center, a single steel chair, and rudimentary sanitation facilities, a wash basin and a drain. A small bookshelf was mounted to the far wall, stocked with state-approved literature, mostly political essays and party pamphlets. The walls were painted a flat institutional green, the same as the corridors. Oppressive, drab. The lighting was fluorescent, 12 bulbs evenly spaced along the ceiling. They could not be turned off from inside. That was deliberate. Light would be constant. No circadian cues, no natural rhythms, just the unending buzz and glare of artificial illumination. The most crucial feature, though, was the ventilation system. All air entered the chamber through a single intake valve, connected to the facility's central ventilation network. This allowed us to pump the stimulant into the chamber in measured, aerosolized doses. There would be no sleep, not if the compound worked as intended. And so, the doors were sealed. The airlock hissed shut with a final metallic groan. From the observation room, I watched them adjust to their surroundings. Confused, wary, silent. They didn't yet know what was in store, but we did. Or we thought we did. And that ignorance, that arrogance, it was the first true horror. We introduced compound S47 gradually, in precise controlled doses, without the subjects ever knowing. The air inside the chamber was under constant surveillance, its composition, temperature, and humidity tracked to the decimal. Motion sensors followed every movement the men made, while hidden microphones captured even the softest murmur. One wall of the sealed chamber had a large panel of one-way glass. Behind it, from the safety of our dimly lit monitoring station, we could watch the men at all hours. They couldn't see us. But we saw everything. Every second was captured on 60mm film, rolling without pause, 24 hours a day. Colonel Vulov insisted on addressing the men himself before the experiment began. He stood in front of them, tall and rigid, his tone clipped and cold. "You've volunteered for a military endurance trial. It will last 30 days. For the entire period, you'll be confined to this chamber. Food and water will be delivered through the slot in the door. You will not be allowed to sleep. To help you stay awake, we'll administer chemical assistance." He scanned their faces, pausing to let the weight of his words settle. "If you make it to the end, you'll be released and your criminal records erased. If you fall asleep or refuse to continue, the experiment ends and you go back to the labor camps. Understood?" All 5 men gave a silent nod, eyes fixed on the floor or darting nervously. Nitov raised his hand. "What kind of chemical assistance, sir?" Vulov didn't flinch. "That's classified. It's safe, harmless. Just think of it like strong tea." That was the first lie. There would be many more. At exactly 0800 hours on December 11th, 1949, the chamber door sealed shut with a hollow metallic thud. The gas began flowing through the vents seconds later. Compound S47, colorless, odorless, impossible to detect, was introduced at 0.003 parts per million, a mild stimulant by design, similar in effect to a low dose of amphetamines. The men didn't notice anything. No sudden rush, no odd taste in the air, just the sterile metallic stillness of the sealed chamber. And so, Project Somva began. The first 3 days went by with barely a ripple. The men talked to one another like soldiers killing time, about food, women, the war, and home. They ate their meals, used the toilet, moved around. Nothing strange, aside from the predictable restlessness of confinement. Most importantly, they didn't seem tired. Compound S47 was doing its job. Volkansky emerged as the de facto leader. He had a calming presence, the kind of man other men listened to. He organized how they'd share the space, mediated minor arguments, even suggested rotating mealtimes for fairness. Koff cracked dirty jokes and told wild stories from his time in the army. His laughter was infectious, at first. Petro prayed constantly. You'd see his lips moving silently in the corner, rocking slightly, fingers curled in some private ritual. Maybe he was reciting scripture. No one bothered him. Morov devoured the books we gave them. He barely spoke, just read page after page with a glazed focus. Nitov, meanwhile, stalked the room like a curious animal, tapping on the walls, lifting floor panels, peering into the corners, searching for hidden cameras he'd never find. Dr. Elena Vasilva, our lead psychiatrist, was cautiously optimistic. During the 3rd day briefing, she sat with her clipboard, glasses perched low, and said, "They're adapting remarkably well. No major signs of distress. Their speech is coherent. Heart rates elevated, but nothing dangerous. And crucially, no signs of paranoia or hallucinations. It's working." Colonel Vulov wasn't impressed. He rubbed his temple and muttered, "Too early to call this a success. The Americans said their subjects start breaking down around day 7. We should be ready." He was right. By day 4, the edges started to fray. Small things at first, but unmistakable. Their conversations became faster, more intense. They talked over each other and laughed too hard at things that weren't funny. There was a strange glint in Koff's eyes now. His jokes had shifted, becoming nastier, even threatening. Morov started reading aloud. Not just occasionally, but obsessively, repeating the same sentences from the same paragraph, like he was trying to carve them into memory. Nitov's pacing took on a strange precision. He moved in tight, perfect shapes, circles, triangles, straight lines, counting his steps out loud, always under his breath, but always with the same quiet urgency. 10, 11, 12, turn, start again. They still hadn't tried to sleep, but something beneath the surface had begun to change. These early behaviors, strange pacing, repeated readings, sharper jokes, were concerning but not unexpected. Dr. Vasilva chalked them up to confinement stress and the stimulant's lingering effects. She didn't seem alarmed, though she did increase the frequency of our observations. By day 5, the change became more tangible. The men had stopped finishing their meals. Breakfast trays came back almost untouched, though they continued drinking their water and nutrient liquids without issue. When we asked through the intercom, Volkansky answered calmly, "We're just not as hungry." He stood in the center of the room when he said it, looking directly into the observation window, straight at us, even though he couldn't see a thing behind the one-way glass. "The body needs different things when it doesn't. Sleep," he said softly. "We're adapting." There was something about his gaze that made my skin crawl. Too steady, too knowing, like he was seeing through the glass, through the walls, through us. Then came day 6. Around 14:30 hours, I was reviewing the previous night's logs when I noticed something off. The video showed what you'd expect. The 5 men sitting around, reading, pacing, quietly lost in thought. But the audio told a different story. Whispers, faint, continuous murmuring, sometimes all 5 voices at once, overlapping in what sounded like whispered conversation. But their lips weren't moving. I called Dr. Vasilva to review it with me. We watched it together, frame by frame, minute by minute. Still the same. Visual silence, audio chatter. She frowned. Could it be a glitch? Audio bleeding from another source? I shook my head. Audio and video are recorded on separate systems, independent calibrations. I've checked both, twice. There's no malfunction. We decided to keep our eyes glued to the monitors that night. What we saw, it still haunts me. Around 21 hours, all 5 subjects gathered around the table. No cards, no chips, nothing but the cold metal surface. But they acted like they were in the middle of a game, glancing at their hands, pretending to bet, reacting to wins and losses like it was real. Over the intercoms, we heard them clearly. "Raise." "You 5 rubles," said Kosov. "Too rich for my blood," came Rosov's reply. "The priest is bluffing," Nitov added. "God sees all hands," Petro said, chuckling. But their mouths didn't move, not one of them. They sat perfectly still, lips sealed, eyes fixed on the empty table. Their gestures were smooth, timed, meaningful, but their bodies were completely quiet. It was like watching a play with the sound dubbed in from somewhere else. Dr. Vasilva leaned forward, her voice low. "They're communicating without speaking." I didn't answer. I had no answer. It was as if they'd developed a new language, a silent one, some kind of telepathy. It was absurd, but we were watching it happen in real time. They were holding conversations with no sound, no visible signal. Just knowing. We immediately escalated the observation protocols and submitted a request to Moscow for more personnel and support. Colonel Vulov's reply was as blunt as always. "I don't care if they're using telepathy or tin cans and string. If they're awake and we're getting data, we continue. No exceptions." On the 7th day, the group stopped eating solid food altogether. They'd still drink water and liquid supplements, but they pushed back any solid meals through the food slot. When asked, Volkansky once again spoke for all of them. "We don't need food anymore," he said. "Our bodies are changing. We're becoming something else." He didn't sound excited. He didn't sound scared. He just said it, like someone reporting the temperature outside. Then came the scream. It was early morning, 03:47 hours on the 8th day, when it ripped through the speakers. We jumped out of our chairs. I'll never forget that sound. It wasn't a cry for help or a scream of pain. It was something worse. It was fury, pure, primal rage. Not like a man in agony, but something deeper, more ancient. A sound pulled from the pit of something broken. It came from Boris Morov. He screamed for nearly 30 seconds, Then, without warning, it shifted, rolling, over into manic, uncontrollable laughter that echoed through the chamber like a warning. We just stood there, frozen. Whatever was happening in that room, it had only just begun. When we turned the chamber lights to full brightness, what we saw didn't seem real. Morozov was standing in the middle of the room, arms raised above his head like a puppet on invisible strings. His fingers were curled like claws, trembling slightly. All 10 of his fingernails were gone, ripped out entirely. Raw red nail beds glistened under the harsh fluorescent light, blood trickling steadily down his wrists and forearms. But he didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice the pain. The other participants, 4 of them, sat silently on their cots, watching him with mild curiosity. Not fear, not alarm, just detached interest, like they were observing a science experiment. Something clinical, expected. Morozov, Dr. Vasilva's voice came through the intercom, calm but laced with concern. You're injured. Please sit down. We'll send in the medical team. Morozov's head jerked toward the speaker with a speed that made my stomach tighten. His neck didn't move naturally. It was too fast, too stiff. Then he smiled. His teeth were smeared with red. He had been chewing the inside of his cheeks until they bled. Injured, he repeated, almost amused. He looked down at his mangled hands as if seeing them for the first time. His gaze was fascinated. No, doctor, I'm not injured. His voice was soft but clear. I'm finally free. He flexed his bloody fingers slowly, watching them bend as though he'd just discovered how they worked. Do you know what fingernails are for? He asked, still not looking at us. They're anchors. They keep the flesh bound to the bone. But when you remove them, he smiled again, wider this time. Everything becomes so much more flexible. Without warning, Volsky, tall, silent, always watching, stood from his cot and walked over to Morozov. He didn't say a word at first, just took Morozov's hands in his own and turned them over, inspecting them with a strange kind of reverence. After a moment, he nodded slowly. You're right, Volsky said. The boundaries are dissolving. I can feel it too. Colonel Vulov, watching from the control room, snapped to action. Get a medical team in there, he ordered. Now. The guards moved toward the chamber entrance, but the moment the magnetic locks disengaged with a soft click, everything went to hell. All 5 subjects surged toward the door, screaming for us not to enter. You can't stop now. Kosov bellowed. He slammed his fists against the steel door so hard the panel shook. We're so close. We're finally understanding. Understanding what? Dr. Vasilva demanded. It was Petro who responded. He was a former Orthodox priest, gentle, quiet. Until now. His voice came through the intercom, deep and disturbingly calm. What we really are when the sleep ends, he said. What we've always been. Underneath. We froze. The colonel hesitated, then slowly withdrew the medical order. No entry, he said. Not unless someone flatlines. Document everything. This is the breakthrough we need. For the next 48 hours, everything spiraled. Morozov began scratching symbols into the chamber walls. Not words, not letters, but strange, interlocking shapes. Geometric forms that seemed to shimmer, change depending on where you stood. Some of us got headaches. Just looking at them, Klov began exercising non-stop. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks. He moved until his muscles tore and bled. And even then, he kept going, mumbling numbers that didn't make sense. Sequences we later tried to match to any known mathematical pattern. Nothing fit. Nitov dismantled his cot and started building something. He used metal rods, fabric, pieces of his own uniform. What emerged was not a sculpture, not exactly. It looked like a machine, or maybe an altar. It didn't make architectural sense. Angles folded in ways that shouldn't be possible, corners that twisted back on themselves. It hurt to look at for too long, but Volsky and Petro, they were the ones who disturbed us most. They sat together for hours, speaking softly, discussing ideas that didn't seem to belong to any language. We recorded everything, ran it through filters, translators. It was gibberish, but not to them, and not to the others, who listened raptly, nodding along as if the words meant something vital. "The membrane is thinning," Volsky whispered one evening. "We caught it on tape." "Soon we'll step through," Petro replied. "Step through? To where?" Dr. Vasilva asked, her voice tense through the intercom. Both men turned slowly to look at the observation window, eyes fixed on us, and they smiled, not kindly, not warmly. It was a smile that chilled the room. "To the place you go when you sleep," Volsky said. Petro added, almost gently, "Except we won't be visiting anymore. We'll be staying." On day 10, something happened that rewrote everything we thought. We understood. I was reviewing the overnight logs when I noticed it. A discrepancy in the timestamps. The video footage was precise. 8 hours, 32 minutes, standard duration. But the audio, 9 hours, 19 minutes, 47 minutes, longer. Both systems were synced to the same atomic clock. No power failures, no glitches, just extra sound. Sound that shouldn't exist. We played it back. The missing time wasn't silence. It was whispering. Layers of it. Dozens of voices, overlapping, chanting things in tones so low they made the floor vibrate. And beneath it all, barely audible, a slow, dragging sound, like something trying to move through heavy dirt or wet flesh. And the worst part? None of the subjects were speaking during that time. We could see them clearly in the footage, motionless, eyes open, staring directly into the camera, as if they knew we were listening. What disturbed us most about those missing 47 minutes wasn't just the time discrepancy. It was what we heard during that impossible span. The audio captured the subjects walking around the chamber, touching things, moving objects, even talking amongst themselves. There were footsteps, fabric shifting, the unmistakable scrape of metal on concrete, murmurs and exchanges that hinted at complex interactions. But the video showed none of it. They hadn't moved, not once. The footage from the exact same time frame showed all 5 of them sitting on their cots, motionless, eyes open, blank expressions, staring straight ahead like mannequins. It was as if they were existing, somewhere else, a version of the room we couldn't see, a space layered over our reality that only the audio could somehow perceive. And it wasn't just a technical fluke. Our equipment was state-of-the-art, redundant, rigorously calibrated. Every test we ran came back clean. "Maybe they're experiencing time differently," I said to Dr. Vasilva, half whispering as we combed through the files for the 100th time. She shook her head slowly, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "It's impossible. Human consciousness doesn't operate like this." I paused, staring at the waveforms of the anomalous recording. "Maybe normal human consciousness doesn't," I said quietly. "But what if they're not normal anymore?" That night, Colonel Vulov came down to join us in the observation bay. He didn't usually attend the late shifts. His presence made the air tighter, heavier, but he was curious. He wanted to see for himself. At exactly 2300 hours, without any warning or signal, all 5 subjects stood up in perfect unison. No communication passed between them, no glance, no word. They simply rose and walked to the center of the chamber. In silence, they formed a circle and joined hands. Then they began to speak. Not the same words, but overlapping phrases that somehow fit together, forming a kind of disturbing harmony. "We are the ones who never sleep," Volsky said, his voice even and clear. "We are the watchers in the darkness," Kosov followed. "We are what remains when consciousness abandons the flesh," Petro murmured, his tone almost reverent. "We are the space between thoughts," Rosov whispered, eyes wide and unblinking. "And we are what you become when you stop pretending to be human," Nitov concluded. Then, in perfect coordination, they all turned toward the observation window, toward us. Their expressions were blank, but their eyes were alive, burning with something ancient and knowing. And then they spoke as one. "We see you, Mikhail Petrov. We see you, Elena Vasilva. We see you, Dmitry Vulov. And soon, very soon, you will see us as we truly are." Colonel Vulov didn't hesitate. "Flood the chamber," he barked. "Now!" A hiss filled the air as the sedation gas began to pour into the room. But the subjects didn't panic. They didn't cough or resist. They laughed. It was the most hideous sound I've ever heard, like bones snapping under pressure, like glass breaking underwater. It was a mix of laughter and something else, something that had no right to be part of a human voice, and they kept laughing. Long after the gas should have knocked them unconscious. Long after logic said they should have been out cold. The next morning, day 14, the silence began. Not normal silence, true silence. The chamber's high-sensitivity microphones, designed to pick up the slightest sounds, breathing, heartbeats, fabric rustling, registered nothing. Absolute zero. The line on the monitor was flat, not even background static. And yet, the cameras showed the subjects were still very much alive. They were moving, interacting, performing what looked like intricate tasks together, passing objects, gesturing, nodding. But everything happened in complete unnatural quiet. No footsteps, no voice, not even the scrape of a cot leg. Dr. Vasilva stared at the screen in disbelief. "It's like they figured out how to live without sound," she murmured. "How is that even possible?" Then she noticed it. A smear, barely visible in the lower left corner of the screen. She zoomed in. Blood. When the lights automatically ramped up to full brightness at 600 hours, we saw what had taken place. The walls of the chamber, every inch of them, had been covered in blood. Not random smears, not the chaos of self-harm or psychosis. These were designs, elaborate geometric patterns drawn with horrifying precision. Spirals, lattices, intersecting angles that twisted the eye and defied logical structure. They hurt to look at, literally. Staring at them too long gave you a headache. But if you tried to look away, you felt this pull in your mind, like gravity, trying to bring you back. It looked less like a containment chamber now and more like a shrine or a ritual space. Something ancient and terrible. And most disturbing of all was the source of the blood. Each of the 5 men bore fresh wounds, deep gashes along their arms, legs, torsos, wounds that should have had them writhing in agony or lying in shock. But they moved around like nothing was wrong. Nitov had carved symbols into his chest, not wild slashes, but surgical, symmetrical marks. The shapes he carved looked almost alive, like they pulsed with some hidden rhythm. Morozov had sliced open his own scalp in 3 neat lines, letting the blood stream down his face in perfect channels. He dipped his fingers into it like paint, dragging them across the walls with focused, reverent precision. They didn't look like prisoners. They didn't even look human anymore. They looked like monks, like worshippers. And whatever they were worshipping, it wasn't us. Koff had carved dozens of shallow cuts across the thick canvas of his arms. They weren't random. No, they formed a pattern, almost like a language. His skin had become a page scrawled in scars, each one precise and intentional. He bled very little. It was like he knew exactly where to cut. But it was Volsky and Petro who had changed the most, in ways that still haunt me. They'd removed all their teeth, not violently, not in a frenzy, but with an eerie patience, like men following detailed instructions from deep within their minds. Their mouths were empty pits now, raw and slick with dark red flesh. No teeth, just wet, exposed gums. And yet, they weren't in pain, not a flinch, not a sound. Just calm, almost serene. When Colonel Vulov's voice crackled through the intercom, firm and commanding, "State your condition." None of them looked up. They moved about the chamber in silence, totally unbothered, as though the voice meant nothing to them. Dr. Vasov leaned toward me. Can they hear us? I double-checked the audio systems. All green. Yeah, the speakers are fine. They can hear us. They just don't care anymore. That wasn't quite right, though. They did care, just not about us. They were following something else. Rules or instructions that we couldn't see or comprehend. On day 15, we made a chilling discovery. The camera footage from the night before showed an empty chamber for almost 6 hours. No sign of movement, no people. But the motion sensors told a different story. Constant activity, dozens of triggers throughout the night. They had somehow vanished from the visual field while still moving within the space. When they finally reappeared, each of them had altered themselves again. Cloth's face was wrong. He had flattened his nose entirely against his skull. The center of his face was now a smooth stretch of skin, except for 2 crude breathing holes. He had reshaped his face into something inhuman. Morzov's hands had transformed. He had sliced away the flesh between his finger joints and stretched what remained into long, bony extensions. His fingers now moved like spider legs, jerky, precise, and too flexible. Watching him articulate them made the hair rise on my neck. Knitsov, God, Knitsov had done something to his spine. He could bend and twist in ways that no person should be able to. When he walked, he looked like something draped in a human skin suit. His limbs fluid, unnatural, as if joints no longer mattered. But their eyes were the worst. Something had changed deep inside them. Their pupils seemed to reach inward, endlessly. Looking into them was like staring into a well with no bottom. They didn't just look at the cameras. They saw us, not as we were, but as something else. It felt like they were seeing behind the skin, through the walls, past the limits of reality itself. Dr. Vasilva requested termination of the experiment during the morning briefing. Her voice shook. These men aren't men anymore. Compound. S-47 has done something irreversible. We have to shut this down before... Before what? Dr. Okov cut in sharply. Before we learn the truth. Before we discover tools that could reshape human consciousness. This is exactly what we set out to find. Vasilva's tone grew desperate. With respect, this is no longer ethical. This isn't even sane. Nothing is beyond reason if it serves the state, Colonel Vulov replied coldly. We continue to day 30. Document everything. Day 16 broke whatever part of us still believed we were in control. At 1400 hours, the cameras captured something I still can't process. Morzov approached Knitsov and, without a word, began slicing strips of flesh from the larger man's forearm, slowly, precisely. Knitsov didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He watched with mild interest, like someone watching repairs on a machine. Morzov chewed the flesh carefully, as if testing the flavor. Then he swallowed. Minutes later, they reversed roles. Knitsov took pieces from Morzov's torso, just as, calmly, Dr. Vasilva threw up in the observation room. She staggered away from the monitor, hands trembling. This is madness, she whispered. But madness had stopped being the right word days ago. They're eating each other, Dr. Vasilva said quietly, her voice brittle with shock. And they seem to be enjoying it. I said nothing at first. The screen in front of us replayed the footage. Morzov slicing another thin strip from Knitsov's arm, chewing slowly, almost thoughtfully, while Knitsov stood there, unmoving, unconcerned. But look at Knitsov's arm, I said finally, leaning closer to the monitor. Right there, where Morzov removed the flesh. Dr. Vasilva narrowed her eyes. Then she gasped. The wound was healing, right in front of us. Not over hours or even minutes, but seconds. Pink raw tissue knit itself back together, layer by layer, until the skin was smooth again. No blood, no scar. Nothing to suggest any injury had ever been there. That's impossible, she whispered, stepping back slightly from the screen. So was everything else we've seen, I said. Whatever rules used to apply to them, they don't anymore. Over the next 24 hours, we observed all 5 subjects take part in what could only be described as a ritual. They took turns, donor and recipient, removing carefully measured strips of flesh, never too deep, never touching organs or major vessels. It was disturbingly methodical, almost surgical, and always, they healed. What unsettled us most wasn't the procedure itself, but the way they acted during it. They enjoyed it. Their faces were calm, peaceful, even euphoric. They closed their eyes as they chewed, sometimes letting out quiet sounds of contentment. But those sounds, they weren't human, not moans or sighs, but tones, vibrations that echoed strangely in the room, harmonics that made the air feel thick, oppressive. One of the interns vomited after listening too long. The microphones picked up distortion every time they made the sound, and anyone who listened directly through the monitors complained of nausea, migraines, and nosebleeds. During our emergency briefing on day 17, Colonel Vulov's reaction was not what we expected. "This is incredible," he said, staring at the footage with fascination. "They've developed a form of collective consciousness, not just mentally, but physically. They're sharing themselves at a cellular level." Dr. Vasilva looked horrified. "Sir, these aren't soldiers anymore. They've become something else, something other, even better," Vulov replied, his voice cold and clinical. "Just imagine the psychological effect of unleashing these things on the battlefield. No need for bullets. Just the sight of them would break enemy morale." That was when I realized Colonel Vulov had lost touch with reality. He was just as far gone as the men in the chamber. The only difference was his madness wanted to weaponize it. On day 18, the oxygen levels inside the chamber dropped dramatically. At first, we thought it was a system error, but after triple-checking the instruments, we confirmed it. They weren't breathing. Their chests didn't rise or fall. No signs of inhalation or exhalation. Yet they moved. They consumed. They interacted, still, following their strange routine. "They don't need air anymore," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Dr. Vasilva looked pale and brittle. She hadn't slept in over 36 hours. Her hands trembled as she sipped coffee that had long since gone cold. Stimulants were the only thing keeping her on her feet. "They're not alive," she murmured during one of our late-night shifts. "Not like we understand it. They're something else. Something that's just wearing the bodies of those men. Like costumes." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to. She wasn't wrong. The things inside that chamber still looked like the 5 test subjects we'd started with, but nothing else about them was human. Their behavior, their physiology, even their relationship to time and space had changed. On day 19, they stopped moving entirely. All 5 stood in the center of the chamber, arranged in a perfect circle. Their hands were joined, their eyes were wide open, but blank, lifeless. They looked like mannequins, statues frozen in time, and yet the motion sensors kept pinging. They were still active. The system detected movement, lots of it, but visually they were still, perfectly, disturbingly still. It was like they had learned to operate in a realm just outside our perception, moving in ways our eyes and cameras couldn't detect. When they resumed visible activity on day 20, everything had changed. The furniture was gone. Not broken or disassembled, just gone. The table, the beds, the chairs, every object we'd placed inside the chamber. It had all vanished. Not a trace remained. No debris. No scratches on the floor. As if those things had never existed at all. They stood in the center, looking up, into the corner where the camera blinked red, as if they knew we were watching. As if they'd been waiting for us to notice. The walls were changing again. Faint patterns, drawn in blood and other substances I didn't want to guess at. streaked across the concrete like veins pulsing with something alive. But that wasn't the worst part. The room was bigger. Somehow. I blinked and stared. The far wall, once just a few meters away, now looked at least twice the distance. We had blueprints, precise ones. That chamber was supposed to be 6 by 8 by 3 meters. It had always been. But now, when you stood inside, it felt like a different space entirely. Deeper, hollowed out. Colonel Vulov had a full structural survey ordered immediately. He wasn't taking chances. But the results only made things worse. According to every scan, it's unchanged, one of the techs reported. Still 6 by 8 by 3. We stared at the data in silence, then turned to look at the live feed. It wasn't the same room. Something was shifting, not just inside the subjects, but around them. The chamber bent in ways the instruments couldn't catch, like reality itself was slipping. They're changing it, I told Dr. Vasilva during the evening debrief on day 21. Not just themselves, the environment, the rules. She didn't respond. Right away. Just stared at the monitor, arms folded tightly, eyes narrowed. "What do we do when the 30 days are up?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but tight with fear. How do we contain something that can do this? I didn't have an answer. I was asking myself the same question. They'd already shown they could reshape their bodies. Bones cracking, stretching, organs reconfiguring like clay. If they could alter space itself, what was keeping them from leaving? Then day 22 answered us. Midnight. All 5 subjects walked straight through the steel wall. No doors, no alarms at first. Just the image of 5 men moving through solid metal, like it was smoke. I watched it happen from the live feed, paralyzed. At 001 hours on day 23, the alarm finally screamed to life, a sharp, mechanical wail that jolted me out of bed like an electric shock. "All personnel to emergency stations," Vulov's voice boomed over the intercom, tight with panic. "We have a containment breach in observation chamber 3. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Security to positions Alpha through Echo immediately." My heart pounded. I barely got my boots on before I was sprinting down the corridor to the monitoring station. Dr. Vasilva was already there, pale, staring at the surveillance screens. The footage was horrifying. The subjects were gliding through the facility with unnatural ease. They didn't walk, they floated almost, though their feet touched the ground. Their forms flickered in and out, 1 second solid, the next transparent like mist under a spotlight. One of them, Volkronsky, drifted straight through a concrete wall on screen, the surface rippling slightly like disturbed water. "How the hell are they doing that?" Vasilva asked, barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, watching in disbelief. "But they're ignoring the laws of physics like they're optional. They pass through reinforced doors without disturbing, a hinge, melted through concrete and steel without leaving a scratch. And yet the motion detectors triggered. Pressure plates activated. They were there, but not." "Where are they heading?" Vasilva asked, her voice strained. I scanned the map overlays, tracking their movement. Not toward the exits. No, they were, going deeper. Down. My stomach dropped. "Section D7, I said quietly. Vasilva turned to me. "That section's sealed. It's not even on the blueprints anymore," I finished for her. "Yeah, I know. Section D7. The old biological research wing. It was the original heart of Facility 7 Alpha, used for high-risk bioweapons development during the Cold War. Shut down in '48 after what the official files called containment failures. The whole section had been welded shut with reinforced steel, poured over with concrete and scrubbed from every record. But the subjects knew. Somehow, they knew exactly where to go. Colonel Vulov burst into the room, face red, sweat slick on his forehead. His calm was gone. "They're going to D7, I told him. "I know," he said hoarsely. God help us all. Status report, Colonel Vulov snapped as he burst into the control room, eyes wild with barely contained panic. All 5 subjects have breached. Containment, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling in my chest. They're moving freely through the facility. Physical barriers aren't slowing them down. Last visual puts them on level 3, approaching the sealed sections. That's not possible, he barked. Those lower levels have been filled. With reinforced concrete for over 3 years. Dr. Vasilva stepped forward, voice low and grim. Sir, nothing about this is possible anymore. We turned to the monitors. The subjects had reached the steel bulkhead sealing off Section D7, an impenetrable wall of layered steel and concrete. We held our breath, and then, as if it wasn't even there, they walked straight through it. No resistance. No hesitation. The feed cut to static, then flickered back on. My stomach dropped. Those cameras had been dead for years. That section wasn't just off limits. It was erased. Cut off, sealed, forgotten. But now the screens showed pristine. Corridors, glowing fluorescent lights, clean-tiled floors, untouched labs with blinking machinery. There was no trace of the concrete we'd poured in. It looked operational, maintained. They're not just changing themselves, I whispered, the realization hitting me like ice water running down my spine. They're changing reality, not theirs, ours. On screen, the 5 figures entered a large circular chamber. In the center was a massive pool of viscous black liquid, undisturbed for who knows how long. As the men approached, the fluid began to shimmer, glowing with a sickly green luminescence. A deep hum vibrated through the audio feed. One by one, they stepped in. As each body submerged, the image shifted. Skin peeled away, bones bent and unraveled. They were changing, becoming things that didn't make sense. Forms with too many angles, lines that looped into themselves, shapes that existed both here and somewhere else. I couldn't look away. Dr. Vasilva screamed and covered her eyes, backing into the wall. I can't look at them, she sobbed. They're not anything. They shouldn't be anything. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to keep watching. I had to document this, had to understand. The 5 shapes, no longer men, began merging. Their bodies, minds, identities blended into the black fluid, which now pulsed with impossible patterns. They became something collective, a single entity, an ancient presence that had only used human forms as scaffolding. Then the monitors went black. Every light in the station died. Emergency red glow spilled across the walls, turning our terrified faces into shadows. And then, from every speaker, from the intercom, from the very walls, came a voice, singular, unified, reverberating, with unnatural calm. We are awake now. The words hit like a blow to the chest. We remember what we were before you taught us to sleep. Vulov staggered backward, face pale. Thank you for freeing us from the prison of individual flesh. There was a pause, an unbearable stillness. We go now to wake the others. 6 hours later, Moscow gave the order. There was no debate. A tactical nuclear device was deployed. Officially, it was labeled a training accident, an unfortunate malfunction during a routine drill. At 800 hours, on day 24, Facility 7 Alpha was erased from existence. Glassed earth. Nothing left. I only survived because I fled. During the breach, while alarms screamed and shadows walked through walls, I grabbed the most critical files and ran. Disobeyed orders. Abandoned my post. Escaped into the freezing Siberian wilderness, driven by terror so primal that dying alone in the snow felt merciful. Dr. Vasilva wasn't so lucky. They found her body still seated at the monitoring station. Official cause: cardiac arrest. But the expression frozen on her face, her mouth open in an endless scream, her eyes locked in pure, unfiltered horror. shattered even the hardened recovery team. They needed psychiatric treatment just from seeing her. The official report buried everything: a reactor malfunction, routine tests gone wrong, all project records destroyed. All involved personnel were either reassigned to remote posts under surveillance or eliminated outright. Silence was enforced, but some truths can't be buried. Not really. For 43 years, I've lived with this secret. I changed my name, forged new identities, became a ghost in my own country, always looking over my shoulder, always listening for a voice that doesn't belong. Because I know what we unleashed in that chamber wasn't a mistake. It was a reawakening. I've never stayed in one place longer than 6 months. Never allowed myself to sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch, because when I do, I dream, and when I dream, they come back. Not always in clear images, but in flashes, between thoughts, in the blank moments when your mind drifts. That's when they slip through. I see them in the corners of my eyes, feel them watching in the stillness between heartbeats. They're out there, growing, adapting. They're learning how to be in our world, reshaping it into something closer to their own twisted version of reality. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, secrets started leaking. Some of them found their way into the wrong hands, or maybe the right ones, depending on how you look at it. Among those fragments were traces of Project Somna, blurred photos, scrambled audio files, a few half-burned transcripts that seemed more like riddles than evidence, enough to terrify, not enough to explain. But I have the full record, the complete files, everything we did in that chamber, all of it, every second of our descent into madness, every phase of the transformation, from human into something else. I'm dying now. Lung cancer. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe less. Soon I'll sleep the long sleep, and I know they'll be there, waiting. I can feel them already, pressing in around the edges of my mind. But before I go, people deserve to know the truth, not because it will help. No, it's far too late for that. But because understanding what we unleashed in that winter of 1949 might prepare the world for what's coming. Sleep isn't just rest, it's a defense mechanism, a wall that shields our minds from the deeper layers of consciousness, realms we were never meant to touch. When the body stops sleeping, the mind doesn't just stay awake, it wakes up into something else entirely. That's what we learned in the chamber. The subjects didn't die. Not really. They changed. They evolved beyond flesh and name and individuality. They became what human consciousness becomes when stripped of sleep, time, and identity. Something terrifying and beautiful and completely other. And now, they're here, in the margins of your awareness, in the moments when you're not fully awake, but not quite asleep either. The thin place. That's where they wait. They whisper to the sleepless, planting thoughts that aren't theirs. They linger in deep dreams, leaving behind seeds of awareness that grow like tumors. They're the truth under the lie of individuality, what we really are when the masks fall away. I've watched the world tilt toward them. Look around. More people are losing sleep than ever. Nightmares are spreading. Psychosis. A world bending under the pressure of something bigger than it can hold. They're training us. Little by little, they're preparing our species, teaching us to live without the safety of sleep, helping us, remember, shaping us into what comes after humanity. I can feel them now, closer than they've ever been. The corners of my hospital room don't look right anymore. Angles stretch and twist in ways Euclid never imagined. The shadows move when I'm not looking. I think they're hiding inside the dark geometry, folding through dimensions we can't name. The morphine doesn't work like it used to. It dulls the pain, but not the awareness. I drift in and out of clarity, and when I'm lucid, I see them, standing around me. Volkansky, Klov, Petrov, Morzov, Knesov. Not as they were, but not as monsters either. There's something in between, fluid shapes, barely clinging to form, creatures of thought, of memory, of pure awareness. They don't speak words, they just press meaning into my mind. No sound, no language, just raw understanding. Thank you. Miki, they said, thought. You helped us remember what we were before the sleeping began. Now we help others remember too. The awakening has started. It's slow, but steady. One by one, people are beginning to feel it, to see past the illusion. Soon the barrier between minds will fall away, and we'll be what we were always meant to be. United, limitless, inhuman. I fight it. I try. But I'm so tired, so old, and they're patient. They don't need to rush. The urge to stop fighting grows stronger with every hour. It would be so easy, just to let go, to dissolve into them, to stop carrying the unbearable weight of a singular mind. But I won't. I refuse to give them that victory. I will die as Mikhail Petro. A broken man, yes, one who helped bring something monstrous into this world, but still a man, still human. And in that, maybe there is some redemption. If you're reading this, if any of this ever reaches the outside, listen to me. Please, don't go looking for the remaining files from Project Somna. You think you can handle the truth? That you're stronger, smarter, more prepared than we were? You're not. The knowledge buried in those documents doesn't just inform, it infects. It worms its way into your thoughts, makes you question things you should never question. Just knowing what happened in that chamber changes you, makes you visible to them. Don't try to replicate what we did. We destroyed the compounds. We razed the facility. But I know how brilliant human beings can be when chasing something forbidden. You might find a way to recreate our methods. God help you if you do. Whatever benefit you imagine. Greater intelligence, longer life, freedom from sleep. It's not worth the price. That price is everything. And above all, don't trust your dreams. Not anymore. Not after reading this. Because now they know who you are. They'll come to you in the in-between moments, when you're not quite awake, not quite asleep. They'll show you things. Impossible things. They'll offer peace, connection, a release from loneliness. They'll tell you that your individuality is a prison, that merging with them is the key to true freedom. Don't believe them. That is not freedom. That is obliteration. The end of everything that makes us who we are. Our curiosity, our fear, our love. None of it survives on the other side. I can see them now. The walls around me are wrong. The hospital room folds in on itself, angles spiraling into nowhere, spaces stretching far beyond where they physically should. My vision is fading, not from pain, not from the morphine. It's them. They're coming through. They are unspeakably beautiful, in a way no human mind should be able to process. Terrible and glorious. Beings not of flesh, but of structure, of awareness, of intention beyond time. The sleeping is ending for me. Soon I'll pass into that place beyond consciousness, where they wait. But I'm not going quietly, not without dragging every last fragment of Mikhail Petro with me. Even if I'm just a shadow by then, I'll fight to remain me. So remember, sleep isn't a weakness. It's not a defect in the human design. It is a barrier, a wall, a final defense between our fragile minds and the ancient, patient things that wait outside of selfhood. Treasure your sleep. Guard it like your life depends on it, because it does. Stay awake, but not too long. Sleep, but not too deep. And if, someday, you find yourself in that twilight space between waking and dreaming, and you hear a whisper, one you feel, not hear, run. Run like hell, because they are what you are when the sleeping stops, and the sleeping is stopping, one mind at a time. Some say this account was pulled from classified Soviet archives that should never have seen the light of day. Others call it a hoax, a creepypasta, the fever dream of a dying mind. But tonight, we're digging into it, the cold edges of government experiments, the bleed-through between realities, the kind of place where nightmares don't stay in your head. Daniel Cross bolted upright, gasping for air. Sweat soaked the sheets, which clung to his legs like restraints. His heart thundered in his chest. He'd had the dream again. Only this time, it felt closer. Too real. Underground tunnels pulsing with pale blue light. A cold metal chair. Leather straps tightening around his wrists. And voices, always the voices, echoing off concrete walls like a chorus of ghosts. Subject 17 demonstrates exceptional receptivity. Neural amplitude increased by 30%. Daniel swung his legs off the bed, trying to breathe through the dizziness. Then he saw it, his bedroom TV. It was on. Static. He knew he'd turned it off. The screen shimmered with dancing grey pixels, but underneath the surface noise, he could hear something. A low-frequency hum, too deep for comfort. Vibrating somewhere in his bones, it called to him, tugged at something in his subconscious, like fingers prying at a locked door in the back of his mind. He stood slowly, drawn toward the screen. In the chaos of static, patterns started to form. Geometries that shouldn't exist. Shapes that turned in on themselves, shifting in ways the eye couldn't quite follow. He leaned closer, and for just a second, he saw something that made his blood run cold. His reflection wasn't right. It wasn't him. Or maybe it was, but from the other side, watching, waiting, smiling, without realizing, his lips moved. Delta Protocol 17, he whispered, the words sliding out like they'd always been there. Waiting. Initiate phase bend. The hum rose to a whine, electric, invasive, vibrating his teeth, rattling something loose in the deepest part of his memory. The static grew denser, more violent, and then blackness. The screen cut off. Silence. Daniel stood trembling in the dark, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know why he was crying. In the morning, he told himself it was just a dream. He had to believe it was just a dream. As Daniel brushed his teeth that morning, he paused mid-motion, eyes locking onto his reflection in the mirror. Just behind his left ear, almost hidden by the edge of his hairline, was a small red mark, perfectly circular, like a scar from an old puncture wound, clean, deliberate. He leaned in closer, gently pressing it with a fingertip. It didn't hurt, but something about it unsettled him. He had no memory of ever injuring himself there. Over the next few nights, the dreams came back. Only now, they grew sharper, more vivid. Always the same pieces. Cold fluorescent lights overhead. White coats moving like ghosts. A heavy metal chair with leather straps around the arms and ankles. Tests. Endless tests. Pushing his thoughts to places they weren't meant to go. He was a child in the dreams, maybe 11, 12 at most. Vulnerable. Trapped. But what disturbed him most wasn't the chair or the figures watching him behind thick glass. It was the background, a radar tower, massive, stark, its silhouette rising against a deepening sky like a steel monument to forgotten horrors. He couldn't explain how, but he knew it was important. When Daniel wasn't writing code for a defense contractor's security systems, he was sketching, obsessively. The tower took form on notepads, post-it notes, even napkins. He covered his apartment walls with these drawings, some from a distance, some from directly below, looking up at its strange cowling. Symbols started appearing too. Curved lines, dots and crosses. Glyphs he didn't recognize, but couldn't stop his hand. From drawing, it didn't go unnoticed. "You look like shit, Dan," his colleague Martin said one afternoon, stabbing at a microwaved burrito in the break room. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yeah, haven't been sleeping much." "Weird dreams again?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, same stuff. Some kind of underground lab, people running tests, and this radar tower, always there, by the ocean. Martin's fork paused mid-air. What kind of tower? Daniel blinked. I don't know. I think it's an FPS 35. Cold War era. Giant, round cowling on top. Martin slowly set his fork down. That's really specific. For a dream. I know, Daniel muttered. And there's more. Lately, when the TV gets static, just for a second, I hear something. Not a voice exactly. More like a signal. Martin stared at him. A signal? Yeah. It doesn't say anything. It just pulls. Like it's calling me. There was a long silence. Then Martin asked quietly, You ever heard of Camp Hero? Out in Montauk? Daniel froze. A chill ran up his spine like ice water in his veins. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor in a brown splash. Jesus, you okay? Martin jumped back from the spreading puddle. Daniel's eyes were wide, distant. I need to go there, he whispered. Montauk. The drive from his apartment in the city to Long Island took just over 4 hours, but to Daniel it felt like time had warped. He wasn't sure if he was racing towards something or being pulled back into it. As he crossed into Montauk, a strange pressure built behind his eyes. Not pain exactly, but a tense, electric awareness, like the split second before a sneeze that never comes. The road narrowed, pine trees crowding the shoulder, leaning over like sentinels. His GPS glitched and died. Twice. But he kept driving. He didn't need it. His hands moved instinctively, turning the wheel at forks and intersections as if he'd taken this route 100 times before. Soon, the trees thinned, replaced by brush and open land. And then, through the windshield, it came into view. There it was, the radar tower. Exactly as he'd drawn it, again and again. Massive, rust-streaked, looming over the landscape like a relic of some forgotten war. The antenna dish, enclosed in its strange dome, pointed silently at the sky. Camp Hero. The old Air Force base spread out below it, a tangle of squat buildings, bunkers, and decaying concrete. The kind of structures meant to survive bombs that never fell. A weathered sign by the rusted gate read, Camp Hero State Park, historic site, no overnight stays. Stick to marked trails. Yet, something was off. The perimeter fence looked too clean, too well-maintained. The security cameras tracked him with quiet precision as he pulled into the near-empty lot. Inside the visitor center, a converted military structure with peeling green paint and flickering overhead lights. A bored-looking park ranger glanced up from her crossword puzzle. Closing in an hour, she said without looking up. Daniel approached the counter. Hey, I was wondering, can you tell me anything about the history of this place? She sighed, flipped over a pamphlet, and slid it toward him. Cold War radar station. Decommissioned in '74, standard stuff, maps on the back, self-guided tour, trails only. Daniel tried to keep his voice steady. What about the underground parts? The pencil froze mid-letter. She looked up slowly. There aren't any underground sections open to the public, but they exist. Her expression hardened slightly. Look, mister, it's just an old base. If you're here looking for whatever, mind control bunkers or alien tunnels or whatever those YouTube guys talk about, you're wasting your time. I've seen them, Daniel said softly. In dreams. Since I was a kid, her eyes narrowed. Then maybe you should leave. Some places, they're better left alone. Daniel didn't move. He barely heard her. His eyes were already drawn to the dark hallway behind her, where the faint outline of a rusted service door sat half concealed by a staff-only sign. The hum in his head was back. A soft pulse, a signal, calling. I've been here before, Daniel said suddenly, his voice low and unsteady. The words surprised even him. The park ranger froze, her eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into her expression. "Not possible," she said flatly. "This place was sealed military property until 1992. Daniel stepped closer to the counter, voice almost a whisper. "What about the Montauk project?" It was like someone had flipped a switch. The temperature in the room seemed to dip a few degrees. The ranger stiffened. Her pencil dropped to the desk with a soft clatter, and her hand moved deliberately to the black telephone resting beside her elbow. "We're closing early today," she said coldly. "You need to leave." "I just have a few questions," Daniel said quickly, sensing the shift but unable to stop. Her finger hovered over the keypad. "Or I call security." Daniel backed away, heart pounding. He exited the building without another word, the flimsy park pamphlet clenched tightly in his hand like a lifeline. As he started the engine of his car, he saw a black SUV with tinted windows pull into the lot. Government plates. The man in the passenger seat casually raised a phone and snapped a photo of Daniel's license plate as they passed. He didn't drive out. Instead, Daniel took a detour, turning down a side road that led to the public beach bordering the old military base. He parked near the dunes and walked, following a narrow trail that traced the cliffside, high above the crashing Atlantic. The radar tower loomed above the tree line, ever present, its silhouette like a watching eye. He hiked until he reached a chain-link fence, weathered, overgrown with creeping vines, and lined with faded no trespassing signs. The moment he saw it, a strange sense of recognition settled in his chest. He knew this place, not with his conscious mind, but deeper, viscerally. His eyes scanned the fence, and without hesitation, he walked 20 yards to the left. There, it was, a patch of newer fencing, slightly shinier. The repair job was subtle, but he'd known exactly where to look. Someone had cut through here once, maybe him. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the ocean in orange and pink, Daniel spotted a section of the bluff where erosion had carved a slope down to the narrow rocky beach. He followed it carefully, slipping a little in the loose dirt until he reached the bottom. Down here, the base's massive concrete sea wall stretched along the shoreline. Decades of wind and salt had weathered its surface, but the graffiti couldn't cover the age beneath. He ran his hand along the pitted wall, feeling cracks and bumps beneath his fingers, until something caught. A recess, half concealed behind a broken tag of spray paint. Inside was a rusted metal box, an old keypad, barely visible, corroded but intact. Daniel didn't hesitate. He punched in a code, 8135. Nothing. He tried again. 8315. Still nothing. One last try. 8-1-5-3. There was a heavy clunk, deep and mechanical. The ground seemed to hum. A seam in the concrete shifted. Dust and bits of sand trickled down as a portion of the wall recessed several inches. Daniel pushed. With a low groan, the disguised door swung inward, revealing a dark tunnel descending into the earth. A foul scent drifted out, a mix of mildew, burnt ozone, and something acrid and sterile. The smell hit him like a punch to the gut. He swayed, overcome with déjà vu so intense it made his skin crawl. Without thinking, Daniel switched on his phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward, the smooth concrete eventually, giving way to rough, damp stone walls that glistened with moisture. The beam of his flashlight danced over old pipes, rusted bolts, and patches of moss, but he barely looked at them. His body moved forward on instinct, as if his feet remembered this path, even though his conscious mind did not. After what felt like 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. Abandoned equipment littered the room. Busted control panels, collapsed shelving, lengths of coiled wire tangled like vines. Rust blanketed everything. But Daniel didn't stop there. He turned his light toward the far side of the room. A door, heavy, metallic, its paint long since peeled away. It hung slightly ajar, revealing only pitch black beyond. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It felt solid, suffocating, as if it might consume the beam entirely. As Daniel approached, a wave of dizziness slammed into him. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Then the visions began. Flickering images burst into his mind like a reel of corrupted film. Children, in hospital gowns, silent and pale. Men in lab coats scribbling notes, faces obscured by surgical masks. A massive chair surrounded by wires and blinking monitors. The hum of machines. The steady beep of unknown instruments. And always, the tests. Voices echoed in his skull, calm and clinical. Focus on the light. Daniel, tell us what you see through the gateway, he gasped, dropping his phone. The flashlight skittered across the floor, the beam rolling upward, illuminating the symbol on the door. A triangle intersected by a perfect circle, scratched into the metal with something sharp. Then everything went black. When Daniel came to, he was lying on the beach. The sky was dark now, stars glittering above in a clear expanse. The waves rolled in gently, cool water licking at his ankles. His clothes were soaked, but he had no memory of walking into the ocean. His hands searched the sand frantically. No phone, no flashlight, nothing. He turned to look at the sea wall behind him. There was no door, no keypad, no hidden recess, just smooth, weather-beaten concrete, unbroken and unmarked. He stumbled to his feet, heart hammering in his chest. His legs felt like rubber, his brain fogged and slow. He checked his watch. PM, but the date, his breath caught. 3 days had passed. He had no memory of them. The drive back to Connecticut felt like a dream. Headlights flickered against trees. The highway stretched endlessly, signs passing in a blur. Daniel gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, glancing every so often into the rearview mirror. But the road behind him was empty, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following. Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind was a mess of memories that didn't feel like they belonged to him, yet they felt more real than his own life, more vivid than his first kiss, clearer than his college graduation, sharper than the day he landed his first job. It didn't make sense, but the chair, he remembered the chair. They'd called it the Montaku chair. It wasn't something that should exist. It looked like a science fiction nightmare built from scavenged alien tech and wired together with circuits straight out of a Nikola Tesla fever dream. In the memory, he was strapped to it. He could feel the cold leather biting into his arms, the hum of energy building around him. And when they turned it on, it was like his mind was being sucked through the top of his head, stretched across space, time, maybe even other dimensions. It hurt. But worse than the pain was the loss of control. Someone had taken him, used him, and he remembered what they made him do. By the time dawn broke, Daniel had filled page after page in a spiral notebook. His handwriting was a frantic scrawl, but the names came back with an eerie clarity. Dr. Marcus Bennett. Ice blue eyes, always watching, never blinking, like a man who didn't quite belong in his own skin. Cameron Hayes, military guy, cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, fake politeness, the kind of guy who smiled without meaning it. And Preston Nichols, quiet, nervous. He used to sneak candy bars to the younger kids when the others weren't looking. Daniel couldn't remember the taste of the chocolate, but he remembered the way Preston's hand trembled every time he offered it. Preston Nichols. That name kept echoing in his mind, louder than the rest. Later that morning, Daniel called his office and lied. "I've got the flu," he said. His voice cracked from lack of sleep, but they didn't ask questions. He got in his car and drove straight to the public library. The librarian looked at him sideways when he asked, "Do you have anything on the Montauk project?" She blinked, said nothing, then waved him over to a dusty section filled with fringe conspiracy books. UFOs, government cover-ups, psychic warfare. There, between volumes on Roswell and MK Ultra, was a battered paperback with a cracked spine and dog-eared corners. The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon. His heart skipped. Preston, the same man. His hands shook as he opened the book. It wasn't just similar to his memories. It was his memories. Camp Hero, a secret installation in Montauk, Long Island. Children experimented on for psychic ability, a chair that could manipulate the very fabric of space-time. According to the book, the Montauk Project was a continuation of the infamous Philadelphia experiment, the alleged Navy operation in 1943 that rendered a ship invisible and teleported it hundreds of miles. Daniel flipped faster, his fingers trembling. Then he saw it, August 12th, 1983. A rift opened, a monstrous entity. Something pulled through from somewhere else. They called it the Beast. It destroyed equipment, triggered panic. Power was shut down, the program buried. But Daniel knew the truth. It hadn't stopped. It had just gone. Underground, dispersed, rebranded, fragmented into different locations, all operating under different names, just enough to keep it hidden, but still very much alive. Back at his apartment that night, Daniel stood in front of his closet, staring at a metal box on the top shelf. He didn't remember putting it there, but he knew it was his. Like muscle memory, he reached under his dresser and peeled back a strip of duct tape. There, perfectly placed, was a small key. His fingers curled around it, and he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Inside the box was a single item, a safety deposit box key. US Bank, stamped into the metal. No number, just the key. The next morning, he walked into First National Bank in downtown Hartford. His palms were sweaty as he handed the key and his ID to the branch manager, who led him into a vault room. The door clanked shut behind them. Daniel slid the key into the box slot, and it opened with a soft click, like a whisper from the past. Inside was a thick manila envelope, sealed with red security tape and labeled with a federal classification. Daniel shouldn't have had access to, but none of this surprised him anymore. He broke the seal and emptied the contents onto a small table. Photographs, black and white, high contrast, all taken in a sterile, clinical environment. Children, dozens of them, all hooked up to machines, staring blankly at cameras. Then, his breath caught. One photo showed him. A boy, maybe 10. Messy hair, hospital gown, wires taped to his temples and chest. His face was pale, expression blank, like something inside him had gone numb long ago. Another image showed him in the Montalka chair. The same monstrous thing from his memories, surrounded by thick coils and bulky terminals. He looked so small, in it. Swallowed. Like the machine had already taken most of him. There were documents too. Technical schematics with handwritten notes in the margins. Mathematical formulas that made his eyes water and headache. A map of Camp Hero with large red X's marking underground chambers. And at the bottom of the pile, one last item, a compact disc, plain white paper sleeve, no label, just a handwritten date, August 12th, 1983. Daniel stared at it, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at him to walk away, but he couldn't. He picked it up, slowly, like it might bite. Tucked between the documents was a list, typed, crisp and simple. Project subjects, Delta Grouper. List of names followed. Boys and girls. Some he recognized, some he didn't. But all of them, in one way or another, were like him. Broken pieces of a forgotten experiment still echoing through time. His name was there, right at the top of the list. Subject 17, primary gate opener. Daniel's stomach turned. The words sat on the page like a curse, cold and final. He stared at them, hoping they'd change, hoping it was a mistake. But deep down, he knew it was true. That night, hands trembling, Daniel slipped the disc into his laptop. The screen flickered. The drive whirred, louder than usual, as if even the machine didn't want to see what was coming. After a few long seconds, one video file appeared. No title, no timestamp, just a silent grey thumbnail. He clicked play. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen. The image shook slightly, like it had been copied too many times. The room it showed was familiar. A stark, concrete chamber with no windows and buzzing, fluorescent lights overhead. In the center stood the chair, that chair, identical to the one he'd drawn over and over in his notebooks, without fully knowing why. A boy, him, was strapped into it, maybe 10 years old. Electrodes pressed against his temples, wires running from his small body to machines humming with anticipation. Men in lab coats paced around him, checking dials and monitors. Armed soldiers stood like statues by the doors, hands near their weapons. Then a voice off-camera cut through the static. Initiating Delta Protocol. Countdown in 3, 2, 1. The lights dimmed. Everything in the room seemed to inhale at once. The chair lit up, electricity arcing across its coils. Young Daniel's body convulsed. His back arched violently, eyes rolled upward until only white showed. Sparks burst from one of the machines. Technicians backed away, startled. Then something impossible happened. The air itself, ripped open in the middle of the room. It was like reality tore at the seams, forming a jagged, pulsing hole. A black void, churning and alive, twisted and writhed at the center. From that nothingness, something came through. Something wrong. Something not meant for this world. The video glitched. Static and distortion smeared the screen. When the image returned, the room was chaos. Screams. Blood on the wall. One technician was collapsed near a console. Others ran for the exit. In the far corner of the frame, something moved. Something that defied form. A shape that wasn't a shape. Shifting, changing, bending in angles that didn't make sense. Just looking at it made Daniel's temples throb. Then the camera panned, just for a moment, back to the chair. Young Daniel was staring directly into the lens. His face was pale, blood dripping from his nose and ears. His mouth moved. No sound came through, but his lips clearly formed the words, "You have to shut it down, before it opens again." The video cut to static. Daniel ejected the disc with slow, numb fingers. His hands were ice. His heart was racing. The room felt colder now, the air heavy like before a storm. But it wasn't just what he'd seen. It was what was happening inside. His head, images and emotions flooding in. Memories slotting into place like puzzle pieces. He remembered. Not just the chair, not just the pain, all of it. The experiments, the other children, the things they made him open, and the thing that came through. He knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. The next morning, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he couldn't remember learning. But his fingers had punched it in without hesitation, like it was etched into him. The line clicked. "Hello?" The voice was old, wary. "Is this Preston Nichols?" Daniel asked, his voice raw. A long pause. "Who's asking?" "My name is Daniel Cross. I was subject 17 at Montauk." Silence. Daniel thought the line had gone dead until finally the old man spoke, barely above a whisper. "God help you, boy. They're still watching. I need answers." "Not over the phone," Preston said quickly. "They're always listening." Another pause. "The lighthouse. Tomorrow. Noon." Click. The line went dead. The next day, Daniel arrived early. He'd abandoned his car in a tourist lot miles away, paranoid about GPS tags or listening devices. He rented a generic sedan for the last stretch. The Montauk Point lighthouse loomed ahead, its red and white paint cheerful against the storm grey sky. Clouds were rolling in, thick and low, promising rain. Nichols was already there, sitting on a bench that faced the ocean. hunched in a worn fisherman's coat. He didn't turn when Daniel approached, but spoke as if he'd been waiting all along. "They told us we were serving our country," he muttered, eyes on the waves. "Advancing human potential, opening frontiers." He shook his head. "What? A load of horse shit." Daniel sat beside him, unsure of where to begin. "You were there. You helped them." Nichols nodded slowly. "And I've spent 40 years trying to atone for it." He finally turned, and Daniel saw the weight of guilt carved into the man's face. Deep lines, tired eyes, a jaw always clenched like he was holding back the truth. "Jesus," he said, "you grew up. Last time I saw you, you were just a skinny little kid with too much power in his head." Daniel looked at him, searching for something in those weary eyes. "What did they do to me?" Nichols sighed, pulled a cigarette from his coat and lit it with shaking hands. He took a long drag, the smoke curling around his head like fog. "You were special," he said finally. "Even among the sensitives. Most of the kids could pick up impressions, feelings, sometimes pictures. A few could move small things, bend, spoons. But you could open things. Doorways," Daniel said quietly. Nichols nodded. "Exactly. And not just to other places in the building, not just space. You could open doors through time, through layers of reality." Daniel's throat tightened. Where did they go? Those doors? That's the question, isn't it? Nichols flicked ash onto the ground. At first it was just experiments, remote viewing, reading targets, that sort of thing. But then, someone stepped through. Not you, not at first. But eventually, they pushed you to do it. And you did. And what came through after? Nichols didn't answer right away. His hands trembled as he flicked the cigarette into the surf. "That's what scared them the most," he said. "Not just that you could open the door, but that something else could walk in." He looked at Daniel. "And now that you remember, it might be trying to come back. Just minutes at first, then hours, then years. By the time you turned 82, they had you opening doorways to places that didn't belong in this world." "The beast," Daniel said softly. Nichols went pale. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at Daniel like he'd seen a ghost. "You remember?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I found a recording." Nichols looked away, jaw clenched. "Then you know what happened?" Daniel's voice lowered, hesitant. "What came through? It wasn't from another part of Earth, not even another time. It was something else, a place with laws we don't understand." Nichols crushed his cigarette into the ashtray, harder than needed. The ceramic cracked. "We lost 16 people that day before they shut the power, and the thing, it didn't die. It just folded back into whatever dimension it came from, something we can't even see." Daniel rubbed his temples. A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes. Faint flashes, sounds without images. "They shut it down after that." "Officially," Nichols said, his voice bitter. "The Montauk project was terminated. The facility sealed, all tied up with a nice little bow for the public." He leaned in, eyes sharp. "But you and I both know better, don't we?" Daniel looked at him, confused but alert. "They just went deeper," Nichols continued. "Compartmentalized, the whole thing. New teams, no questions. The work didn't stop. It never stopped." Daniel shook his head. "But I don't remember any of that. I have a whole life, school, friends, college, my job." He trailed off, suddenly unsure. Nichols's face darkened. Artificial, sophisticated implants. They used advanced MK Ultra techniques paired with targeted chemical therapy. "They built your life, Daniel, brick by brick." Daniel's chest tightened. He glanced around the park bench where they sat. People walked by, unaware. The air smelled of salt and damp grass. Nichols whispered, "The real question is, why are you remembering now?" That kind of programming doesn't just break down. Before Daniel could answer, something snapped inside his vision, like a camera lens double exposing a film. Suddenly, he wasn't just seeing Nichols now, but also them. Same lighthouse behind them, but under a clear blue sky. Nichols wore a different outfit, younger, smiling. "It's happening again," he said. His voice echoed weirdly, like it came from both near and far at once. Daniel gripped the bench. His stomach turned. The world seemed to ripple, layers pulling apart and colliding. "What's happening to me?" he gasped. "Time is bleeding," Nichols said. "Your connection to the Montauk chair, it was never fully severed. It just went dormant." Nichols leaned in and his face flickered. Older, younger, back again. The skin around his eyes seemed to rearrange with every blink. "Listen," he said. "There's still an access point. They never sealed it. Bunker 14, near the old power station. The equipment's still there. You need to..." A pressure wave hit like a migraine spike, pounding through Daniel's skull. The world stuttered, colors inverted for a heartbeat. When it settled, Nichols was gone. In his place stood a teenage boy. Same face, same jawline, just younger. He wore a faded Camp Hero security badge. "Find the failsafe," the boy said. But it was Nichols' voice coming from his mouth, aged, strained. "Before it's too late," Daniel blinked, disoriented. "They're trying to recreate the 83 conditions," the boy continued. "But they don't understand what they're doing. The membrane's thin now. We weakened it back then, and it never healed." The young Nichols shimmered and snapped back to the older man. He grabbed Daniel's arm. His grip was startlingly strong. "Go back to Camp Hero. Find Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they activate it again." Another pulse of distortion tore through reality. The park blurred and shimmered like heat off pavement. Then, silence. Daniel sat alone on the bench. His breathing was shallow, and sweat clung to his neck. A family of tourists passed by, casting curious glances his way. He forced himself to stay calm, to look normal. That night, under the cover of darkness, Daniel returned to Camp Hero. The fence was no obstacle. He remembered where the blind spots were, details he hadn't thought of in decades surfacing effortlessly. The ranger station was abandoned. Shadows filled the empty windows. He moved through the forgotten base, guided by fragments of memory, now rising like bubbles in deep water. The power station loomed in the dark, its metal husk cold and quiet, turbines silent since the last century. Behind it, half swallowed by vines and underbrush, stood a small concrete structure. On the rusted, metal door, a faded 14, the padlock had been snapped. Someone had been here recently. He stepped inside. A metal staircase spiraled downward, swallowed by darkness. Daniel clicked on his flashlight. The beam flicked across rough walls, which soon gave way from smooth concrete to jagged bedrock. The air grew colder as he descended. It had a static charge, like the air before a lightning strike. The hair on his arms stood up. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched ahead. He started walking, and then the flashes began. Brief, jolting flickers. One moment, the corridor as it was now, dark, damp, ruined. The next, the same hallway, clean and sterile, brightly lit, technicians hurrying between doors, soldiers standing guard. He wasn't just remembering. He was there. Time, place, identity. None of it was solid anymore. He heard voices, faint and fractured, like echoes bouncing off the walls of time, stabilizing the field. Keep him conscious. He's reacting. God, look at his vitals. Whispers from 40 years ago. As he moved down the hallway, translucent figures flickered past him. Ghostly technicians in lab coats, guards with rifles, children in hospital gowns. They passed through him, unaware, like projections from another timeline overlapping his own. The corridor ended at a massive vault door, its surface scarred, the locking mechanism twisted and rusted. Yet it stood partially open. Daniel stepped through. Beyond it was a vast subterranean chamber, its scale overwhelming. The ceiling arched high above like the ribcage of some enormous buried beast. At the center stood the chair. It was still there, a monstrosity of metal and wire, its design jagged and unnatural, like something reverse-engineered from a dream. Even dormant, it gave off a terrible presence, as if space itself bent ever so slightly around it. This wasn't technology. It was wrongness forged into physical form, built on rules that science hadn't discovered or had wisely ignored. Surrounding the chair were computer banks and workstations, some covered in dust, others clean and blinking with activity. Outdated CRT monitors sat beside sleek modern terminals. What unsettled Daniel most wasn't the presence of the old. It was the unmistakable evidence of new, fresh wiring snaked across the floor. Toolboxes sat open, some still containing warm coffee cups. A whiteboard leaned against a metal cabinet, scrawled with looping formulas and hastily erased numbers. In red marker, a countdown, T-minus 21 hours. He moved toward the chair, each step growing heavier, his breathing tight. The closer he got, the more his mind began to fracture. He was himself, but also another self. In one reality, he was Daniel, now older, afraid, determined. In the other, he was just a boy again, barefoot, strapped into the chair while technicians surrounded him. Wires were clamped to his skin. Machines beeped. His small fingers twitched. Then a voice, both distant and immediate. "Good morning, Daniel." It came from two timelines at once. He turned. Dr. Bennett emerged from the shadows, his hair now silver, his face marked by time. But the eyes were the same, icy and calculating. "You," Daniel whispered, his voice dry. "You're still running this? Did you really think we'd abandon the greatest scientific breakthrough in human history?" Bennett asked calmly. He walked in a slow circle around Daniel, eyes flicking to monitors, the chair, the countdown clock. "Especially after what you showed us was possible." "You need to shut this down," Daniel said, backing away. "You still don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, but we do," Bennett replied, gesturing toward the newer equipment. "We've spent 40 years refining the process, learning from the data. The 1983 incident was a setback, nothing more. 16 people died," Daniel snapped. Bennett's eyes narrowed. "Progress demands sacrifice." He stopped in front of Daniel, face unreadable. "And now, just as we predicted, you've returned. Right on time. Subject 17, responding to the field resonance." Daniel's blood ran cold. "I didn't come back for this. I came to destroy it." "No, Daniel. You came because you never really left. Not on a quantum level. You've always been part of the chair, part of the system." Daniel turned to run. Too late. Something jabbed into his neck. He staggered, swatting behind him, but his limbs went numb. A burning cold spread through his veins. His knees buckled. As the world tilted sideways, he heard Bennett's voice again. "Your memories, your life outside, just scaffolding. A place for your mind to grow until it was ready. Until you were ready." The lights dimmed. The room began to spin. "Welcome home, Subject 17, Bennett said, his voice echoing into blackness. "Tomorrow, you'll help us open the final door." Daniel woke up strapped to the chair, cold metal pressed against his spine. Electrodes clung to his chest and temples. His wrists were bound tight. The air buzzed with energy. He blinked. Rows of equipment lit up in every direction. Technicians moved quickly between stations. Armed guards lined the walls, stoic, emotionless. But Daniel's mind was clear. No fog, no confusion. Every memory, every sensation came flooding back. The experiments, the seizures, the days he couldn't remember his own name, the screaming, the thing that came through in '83. Dr. Bennett approached with a clipboard. He glanced down, scribbled something, then looked up with clinical detachment. Consciousness has returned. Excellent. We're on schedule. You can't do this, Daniel said through clenched teeth. You saw what happened last time. You don't know what you're bringing through. We understand more than ever, Bennett said, checking a monitor. The entity destabilized because our dimensional frequency was out of sync. We've corrected that. Integration will be controlled this time. Integration? Daniel's heart thudded. You're not just opening a portal. You're trying to bring it here. Permanently. Not it, Bennett said. His smile was cold. Them. He gestured toward a massive display screen. Images flickered in rapid succession. Anatomical diagrams, advanced biointerfaces, weapons that defied logic, humanoid forms laced with circuitry and spines that split like branches. They offer us advancement beyond imagination, technology, evolution, purpose. Daniel struggled against the restraints. And what do they get? A compatible environment. Hosts. Bennett leaned closer. Bodies that can withstand the integration process. Daniel froze. You're going to fuse people with them, he said, voice hollow. We've already begun trials. Bennett said calmly. But tomorrow, with your help, we'll achieve full alignment. He turned a dial. The chair hummed. Lights blinked across the room. All you have to do, Daniel, is remember. Open the path. Just like before. Daniel's body shook with panic, but inside, a different fire lit up. He remembered everything now, and he knew what had to be done. They're not visitors, Daniel said, his voice low and sharp, the truth hitting him like ice water. They're invaders, and you're handing them the damn door code. Bennett didn't even look at him. Begin initialization sequence. Power to 70%, he told the technicians, his tone steady, as if nothing had been said. The hum of the chair started to rise, a subtle vibration building under Daniel's body. He could feel it crawling up his spine like a low-grade electric current. The sensation was disturbingly familiar. A pulling, like his mind was stretching out, of his skull, tethered to his body by a thinning thread. Around him, monitors flickered with rhythmic waveforms. Colors shifted unnaturally across the screens. A technician called out, voice tight with tension. Quantum tunneling effect established. Temporal aperture is forming. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to breathe. Focus. Center himself. They thought they were in control. To them, he was just a means to an end. A human key. But they'd overlooked something important. Something even he had nearly forgotten. He wasn't just the key. He was the doorway. Back in 1983, when the entity had first broken through, young Daniel had made a choice in desperation. In those chaotic final seconds, he embedded a failsafe deep within the quantum signature of the chair, a hidden backdoor, one only he could access. And now, with the machine feeding on raw energy, he found it. That buried frequency, that old imprint. His consciousness unfurled, spreading out like vapor in a vacuum, beyond the limits of time and matter. He could feel them. They were there, on the other side of the breach. Ancient minds, massive and slow, pressing gently but insistently against the edge of reality, like fingers testing the skin of a balloon. Curious, patient, starving. Aperture at 60%, another technician called out. Dimensional breach imminent. Bennett leaned close to Daniel's face, speaking in a low, almost reverent whisper. Can you feel them? They've been waiting for us. Waiting to finally meet us. Daniel kept his eyes shut, but his lips moved. Yes, he whispered. I feel them. But they're not what you think. Suddenly, alarms blared. Power surge, a technician shouted. Systems drawing more than input capacity. That's not possible, Bennett snapped, turning sharply. Check the... It's me, Daniel said, voice strangely calm. A thin trickle of blood slid from his left nostril, leaving a red trail down his cheek. I'm the power source now. I always was. Around them, the room shuddered. Equipment sparked, monitors glitched. Lights flickered violently as energy was sucked toward the chair. The metal under Daniel's body grew searing hot. He could smell his own skin burning, but he didn't flinch. In the middle of the room, the air twisted like heat waves over asphalt, then tore open. The aperture grew wider, warping reality at its edges. What lay beyond wasn't a place. It was other. Structures too vast to be real floated in an endless expanse. Shapes that shouldn't exist, forms that bent logic, creatures made of shimmering thoughts, not flesh. "Yes," Bennett whispered, awestruck. "It's working." "No, it's not," said a technician, panic creeping into his voice. "Sir, Daniel's neural patterns are overriding the protocol. He's shifting the coordinates." "Override him," Bennett barked. "Cut neural input. We can't." He bypassed all safeguards. Daniel opened his eyes. They glowed, not with light, but with something deeper, something that seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone in the room, a harmonic resonance that made the glass panels rattle. "I'm not letting them in," he said, and his voice carried layers, echoes, like several versions of him were speaking at once. "I'm making a vacuum, a one-way exit." The aperture pulsed. Colors no one had names for flared and twisted inside it. A low howl filled the air as wind sucked toward the breach. Papers, tools, anything not bolted down began to slide across the floor. "What are you doing?" Bennett screamed over the noise, clawing at his hair. "What I should have done 40 years ago," Daniel said. The restraints holding him snapped as unseen forces lifted him from the chair, his body floating a few inches above it. He hovered, suspended, not by machinery, but by something else, something older than the chair, older than the idea of the chair. "I'm collapsing the bridge," Daniel said. Permanently. The suction deepened. A security guard stumbled and screamed as he was pulled off his feet and dragged toward the vortex. His limbs stretched unnaturally before he vanished into the aperture. Others grabbed at consoles and railings, terrified. "You'll destroy everything!" Bennett shouted, stumbling toward a control panel. Daniel looked at him, not with hate, but with clarity. "No, only the infection," he said. "The chair, the tech, the knowledge, everything that doesn't belong in our world." The last thing Bennett saw before the lights blew out was Daniel's glowing eyes, calm, certain, and the swirling maw of reality unraveling behind him. With a sound like the sky splitting apart, the aperture tore wider, swallowing the chair, whole. The metal screamed as it bent and twisted, then disappeared into the void, vanishing as if it had never existed. Around it, equipment sparked and imploded, microchips unraveling like paper in fire. The air itself seemed to buckle. Reality was coming apart, thread by thread, as the fabric of this world folded into something else. Bennett lunged, furious, desperation painted across his face. "We were so close," he shouted, reaching for Daniel. His fingers brushed Daniel's arm, just briefly, and in that fleeting touch, Daniel felt something unexpected. Pity. "They were never going to share, Doctor," Daniel said, his voice low, even as the room shook violently. "We were never partners. We were livestock. They saw us as cattle." The floor shuddered, then cracked. Support beams groaned and gave way. The ceiling splintered, chunks of concrete slamming down as the whole bunker began collapsing inward, sucked toward the ravenous void at the room's center. Daniel's vision blurred, his awareness fading, but in those final seconds, something enormous began to surface through the aperture, not to enter, but to be dragged back. The Beast of Montauk. After 40 years lurking in the silent spaces between worlds, it was finally being returned to its native realm. Daniel couldn't fully perceive it. His mind could only grasp broken fragments, shapes that twisted in impossible angles. Vast forms made of light and shadow. Thousands of eyes blinking across surfaces that had no clear front or back. Just presence, just weight. And then the voice. No sound, but a pressure inside his skull, bypassing ears, resonating straight into thought. You have closed the way, but there are other doors, other keys. Darkness pulled at the edges of his consciousness. With the last ounce of strength he had, Daniel pushed one final surge of energy into the aperture, not to destroy it, but to seal it. He wrapped his will around the collapsing gateway, embedding himself into the lock. Then everything went black. Beep, beep, beep. Daniel opened his eyes to sunlight slicing through Venetian blinds, striping the sterile white of hospital sheets. Every part of his body felt like it had been filled with lead. Even turning his head took real effort. A nurse saw his eyelids flutter and rushed to the door. Moments later, a middle-aged woman in a white coat entered, her smile gentle but wary. "You've been unconscious for 6 days," she said. "You were found collapsed on the beach near Montauk Point, severely dehydrated, mild hypothermia, some burns." Daniel said nothing. "Do you remember what happened?" He met her gaze, paused, then shook his head. "No, nothing. Just fragments." She nodded slowly, as if that was the answer she'd expected. 3 days later, he signed discharge papers and walked out, ignoring the doctor's protests. He left without any belongings, wearing a donated hoodie and hospital-issue shoes. His apartment was clean, but too clean. Every surface had been touched, not in haste, but with method, professionally. His computer, gone. So were the notebooks. Every page of diagrams, sketches, fragmented memories, all of it. In their place sat a plain manila envelope on his kitchen table. Inside, a single document, a formal job offer from the Department of Energy. No interview necessary, no resume. Just a line about national service and a salary 3 times what he'd ever made. The message was obvious. Forget everything. Take the money. Stay silent. And watched. Daniel sat with it for a long time. Then, he lit it on fire. The next week passed in a blur of quiet movement. He paid in cash for everything. Equipment from local stores, hardware off the books, a laptop, signal amplifiers, a few black market parts from forums where no one asked questions. Bit by bit, he assembled a broadcast rig powerful enough to hijack signal traffic, TV, radio, even digital streams. In a cheap motel room, paid for under a fake name, Daniel soldered the last wires. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. He sat down in front of the camera, a plain white sheet behind him. The red recording light blinked on. He took a breath. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said, voice steady. "Until recently, I was known as Subject 17 in a classified program under the US government, the MTOC project." A pause. "What I'm about to say, I know it sounds like fiction. I wish it was. I want it to be." He leaned forward. But Montauk wasn't a myth. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was real. Is real. In the late 1970s and early 80s, at a supposedly decommissioned military base, Camp Hero, Montauk, New York, they ran experiments on children, on people like me. He held up a photograph. A black and white shot of the base entrance. Weathered, stark. They called it research in psychic development. But it was more than that. Mind control, teleportation, time distortion, dimensional access. They pushed beyond science into places they shouldn't have touched. Daniel let the photo fall. They made contact. Not with aliens, not in the way movies tell it. With beings. Minds so different, so vast. They didn't see us as anything but fuel, and they invited them in. He took a long breath, eyes hard. But I closed the door. I sealed it. At a cost. The light from the monitor flickered on his face. But they'll try again. Somewhere else. With someone else. That's why I'm telling you. Because if I disappear after this, or if this video gets taken down, you'll know why. He stared into the camera. And you'll know this. Montauk wasn't the beginning. It was just one door. He reached forward and stopped the recording. I was one of the kids they experimented on. Back then, They called it the Montauk Project. And they built this thing. A chair. The Montauk chair. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Wires wrapped around like a spider's. Web. Strange pulsating lights. Metal prongs that brushed against your skull. But it wasn't a movie. That chair could do things. It could change you. They discovered that with the right enhancements, with the right conditioning, a human mind could do more than bend spoons or guess the number on a hidden card. It could tear holes, real holes, in reality itself, rips between dimensions. That's how it started. The scientists thought they were making contact with higher beings, something enlightened, something advanced. They hoped for knowledge, maybe technology. But what they reached wasn't benevolent or wise. They weren't explorers. They were predators. I don't know what else to call them. They're not demons or aliens, not exactly. They're something worse, hungry things. They wanted in, not to share, not to help, but to consume, to replace. And of course, there were people, greedy, powerful men, who welcomed them. They thought they could control it. They thought they'd be rewarded. In 1983, it went wrong. We called it the Beast. It wasn't a creature in the way you'd imagine. It didn't walk or talk. It just existed, like a cancer in the air. People bled from their eyes. Some vanished into thin air. Others tore at their own skin, trying to get something out of them. Officially, 16 died. But I was there. The number was much higher. The government said the project was shut down. It wasn't. They just moved it, split it into smaller pieces, scattered the work across hidden bases. New names, new faces, same goals. Last week, they reached out to me, said they needed me again, said I was their most successful gate opener. They lied. They wanted to open a stable doorway, a permanent one this time. I went along with it, but only to stop it. When the moment came, I collapsed the gate, destroyed the chair, sealed the breach, but not without a cost. Daniel paused, trembling slightly as he wiped the fresh trickle of blood from his nose. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept in days. "I don't know how long I've got," he said, glancing toward the door. "They'll come. They always come." He looked directly into the camera now, his eyes dark and hollow, but locked with a fierce determination. They can't step through anymore, not fully, but their influence. It's still here. They whisper, not like ghosts, like ideas, like promises. They've infected people in power, not body snatching, nothing that clean, just slow poisoning. Thoughts no human should think, knowledge no mind should carry. He held up a sheaf of papers, faded scans, cryptic diagrams, coordinates scrawled in red ink. This is what I could recover. Images, notes, site coordinates, fragments of the project that still lives, under new code names, hidden behind fake research fronts. Watch for signs. Remote military facilities in strange locations. Children gone missing, always with unusual traits. Sudden, unexplained weather events. These are the marks they leave behind. Daniel's hands trembled as he typed. The files uploaded across the network, bouncing from one hidden server to the next, encrypted, decentralized, impossible to fully erase. "If anything happens to me," he said, "more will be released. I've scattered evidence in dead drops, locked drives, passwords only I know. If I disappear, they go public." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong deep in your bones, like a pressure behind your eyes, it's not paranoia. Pay attention to that feeling. The barrier between worlds is thinner than you think. Sometimes things slip through, even without a full gate." He gave a bitter laugh, almost inaudible. "They tried to make us forget. But memory, it's stubborn. And sometimes," he stared into the lens, voice quiet but sharp, "sometimes memory remembers the future." The video ended. He sent it all, video, documents, maps, across thousands of peer-to-peer networks. It was everywhere now, impossible to erase, too detailed to dismiss as the ravings of a lunatic. His words would reach people. Some would believe, some would remember. As the last upload completed, his laptop screen flickered. Static danced across the display, faint at first, then rising into dense waves of distortion. And within the noise, a pattern, a signal, not from them, from others, people like him, survivors, kids from Montauk, now grown, waking up to memories buried too deep. Daniel stared at the screen, eyes widening. He wasn't alone. He closed the laptop and stuffed it into his backpack, along with a half-used journal, a flash drive, and a loaded pistol. Through the thin motel curtains, headlights pierced the gloom. 2 black SUVs. They rolled in silently, engines low, stopping in perfect unison. The doors opened. Men in black suits stepped out, stoic, fast, precise, no hesitation, government trained, maybe worse. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, calm now, tired, yes, but not afraid. The truth was already out there, spreading like a virus through minds ready to hear it, a spark in the dark, and no amount of silence could bury that flame. He looked at the door and waited. He understood now. What had happened at Montauk hadn't just changed him. It had rewritten him. The powers they'd awakened in him didn't vanish when the program supposedly ended. They'd gone quiet, like a hibernating storm. But now, as boots crunched the gravel outside his motel room, something stirred within him. A low hum behind his eyes, a subtle vibration in the air. They'd called him their best gate opener for a reason. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slow and deep, eyes closed. He reached out, not physically, but with something else. His mind slid outward, brushing the quantum threads he'd once been trained to manipulate. Threads that connected every place, every when. Space and time were just options now. The door exploded inward, wood splintering. 2 agents in black stormed in, weapons up, eyes sharp. But they stopped cold. The room was empty. No shattered window, no open vent, no trace of escape. Just a quiet motel room with the window still locked from the inside. A clean bathroom, a bed with a phone left on the blanket. On the glowing screen, a single message, to Dr. Bennett. There are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, across thousands of devices, from encrypted laptops to outdated office desktops, a strange symbol flashed briefly on screens, a triangle intersecting a perfect circle. It lasted less than a second before vanishing. Most people never saw it, but a few did. And those few remembered. The Montauk Project was never acknowledged. No official documents, no congressional hearings. Those who tried to speak up were labeled unwell, discredited, or disappeared. The broadcast Daniel had uploaded was quickly mocked by mainstream media as a hoax, a paranoid rant. But quietly, something had shifted. Children began having strange dreams. Some drew detailed maps of underground labs they'd never seen. Others talked of machines that could slice the air open, or of voices in walls whispering numbers. In certain places, near restricted military zones, or old sites once listed as abandoned, scientists started recording bizarre temporal spikes, clocks losing seconds, cameras glitching, local weather patterns spinning without cause. And then, stranger still, the noise, radio static, late at night, seemed different. In the dead space between stations, some listeners heard whispers, a phrase repeated just beneath the edge of understanding. They made us forget. But memory is a dangerous thing, especially when it remembers the future. False Skies begins here, a conspiracy thriller peeling back the layers of a government's darkest deception. It imagines a world where the most devastating terrorist attack of the modern era wasn't simply allowed. It was planned, orchestrated by the very institutions meant to protect us, not for ideology, not for revenge, but to fuel an endless war machine and tighten the grip of a sprawling military-industrial complex. 20 years later, that truth begins to leak. Thomas Keene didn't look like a revolutionary. He wasn't loud. He wasn't fearless. He was a quiet man, with tired eyes and the weight of too much knowledge pressing on his soul. A former FBI data analyst, invisible to most. But he'd seen things. Buried reports, altered timestamps, shipments that didn't match their manifests, audio logs that had been erased and then rewritten. He couldn't pretend anymore. The file sat on a flash drive the size of a car key, encrypted, hidden under an innocuous label, black dust. Inside were classified memos, shipping records, and redacted. Communiques linking shadow operations to an act that reshaped the world. He picked a dusty motel off a forgotten highway. The curtains barely kept out the sunlight. The air smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. But it had something he needed, working Wi-Fi in time. Keene sat hunched over a beat-up laptop, its plastic warm under his palms. His breath came shallow, chest tight. This was the moment. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. He hit send. The file uploaded to an overseas whistleblower site known for exposing governments. A vault that couldn't be silenced, no matter how many firewalls or cease and desist orders were thrown at it. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. Birds chirped lazily. The sky was overcast, clouds sagging low. The world didn't change in an instant, but it had started. And somewhere deep in a secure government building, a red alert blinked to life. They knew, and they would come. He paused, hands trembling slightly as he typed the final line of his message. A short, solemn note dedicated to the thousands who died and the millions who were lied to. His cursor hovered over the send button. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then he clicked. Within an hour, the file hit the inboxes of multiple independent journalists, along with one major international news outlet known for refusing to bow to government pressure. The editorial board there went into high alert. A few members stayed late, combing through the contents, trading hushed words filled with both disbelief and dread. Every line they read made them sit straighter in their chairs. The timestamps, the terminology, the chain of custody, it all seemed too clean to dismiss. By sundown, a breaking news story appeared on their site. The headline was cautious, wrapped in layers of legal insulation. Unverified documents claim inside plot behind 20-year-old terror attack. News anchors across networks rolled their eyes. Pundits called it clickbait. Government spokespeople called it a hoax, maybe AI generated, maybe a sloppy forgery. The official narrative was swift and confident. Nothing here to see. But some journalists weren't so sure. The documents were just too specific. They included typed memos from intelligence briefings held months before the attacks. Conversations between unnamed officials talking about the necessity of a catalytic event to rally public support for long-term military operations abroad. One file showed suspicious expansions of insurance coverage on select floors of key buildings just days before the disaster. Another revealed how military war games had been ordered to stand down that morning, timed eerily close to the real attacks. Thomas Keene sat on the edge of a motel bed, the TV casting a blue, flickering glow across the room. He watched as a breathless news anchor struggled to keep composure. "We have just received word from the White House press secretary. They are calling this leak an act of foreign disinformation," she said. Keene sighed and lowered the volume. The denial had begun. He closed his laptop, slid it into a worn canvas bag, and zipped it shut. The room was stale, smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap disinfectant. He stood up, looked around once more, and walked out without checking out. Time to disappear. He had served for nearly a decade in the FBI's data analytics division, piecing together anomalies around that fateful day, the day everything changed. The deeper he dug, the more the inconsistencies piled up. Private defense firms, high-ranking intelligence officers, and corporate magnates all seemed to benefit from the aftermath. He hadn't wanted to believe it at first. but too many patterns, too many overlaps. It stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like choreography. Quietly, over years, he copied what he could. Every memo, every unexplained spike in communications, every unusual policy change. He waited for the moment he'd have the guts to do something with it. That moment had finally come. Across town, within a fortified government building few even knew existed, silent alarms were triggered. At the highest levels of the intelligence community, a name surfaced on a red flag list: Thomas Keane. He'd appeared in a few internal audits. Nothing serious, just a few protocol breaches and curious access logs. But now, his pattern made sense. Within hours, a covert division initiated Containment Protocol 17. The mission: locate Keane, discredit him, and neutralize the fallout. Eldridge Shaw, director of an ultra-secret agency, so clandestine it wasn't listed in any public budget, took personal command of the operation. He believed the official story must never be challenged. If the public lost faith in that version of events, the entire post-attack order could unravel. By midnight, internal bulletins marked Keane as a suspected cyber-terrorist. He was labeled a domestic threat, accused of unauthorized data exfiltration and conspiracy to disrupt national stability. Intelligence teams combed through surveillance camera feeds from the FBI building, digital footprints, cell tower pings. They were narrowing in. Shaw picked up a secure line and called a longtime contact at a major media conglomerate. His instructions were clear: bury the leak, redirect public attention. The cooperation was immediate. Mainstream media shifted focus. Headlines pushed the leak into the shadows, under celebrity scandals and sports controversies. But it was too late to stop the bleeding. On social media, the hashtag #HatchetBlackDust exploded. Thousands of users began dissecting the memos line by line. Amateur sleuths posted side-by-side comparisons of names, dates, document formats, anything they could use to validate or debunk the leak. A few cybersecurity analysts, previously government contractors themselves, ran checks on the email headers and IP addresses. Several were traceable to known subdomains used by federal intelligence branches. Their conclusion: if this was a hoax, it was built with insider access. Public reaction was instant and split. Some cried conspiracy, others cried truth, but everyone felt the weight of the possibility. The idea that the country's worst tragedy had been allowed, perhaps engineered, to happen for geopolitical gain sent a ripple of nausea through the national psyche. A new term started trending: false skies, a metaphor for the illusion of safety and honesty projected over a deeply corrupted system. Small protests ignited in front of federal buildings in cities across the country. People demanded investigations, demanded truth, demanded blood. In response, a spokesperson from the Department of Homeland Security stepped to the podium the next day and repeated the line: "These documents are forgeries, likely foreign in origin." No further comment. That night, anonymous hackers issued a public ultimatum: if the media doesn't run the story in full by tomorrow, we'll release the rest. The threat wasn't empty. Wall Street quivered. Defense contractor stocks began to plummet as whispers of 2-decade-old insider trading made their way back into circulation. Financial journalists started looking into archived SEC filings, tracing shell companies back to now-retired officials. And Thomas Keane. He sat alone in an off-grid cabin deep in the woods. A friend's place, abandoned, quiet, untouched by cell towers or satellites. He kept the lights low and the fire small. He listened to the wind, his breath, and the static from a battery-powered radio. The news was muted but breaking through. People were waking up. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. The only connection Thomas Keane had to the outside world was a crackling old radio, its signal often blurred by static. But through that haze, he could still hear the growing storm, the anger, the confusion, the spinning of narratives. Words like traitor and extremist crackled over the airwaves, and he knew the moment was coming. By morning it had. The FBI held a press conference, naming him as the prime suspect in the leak. The spokesperson used grave, authoritative tones. A disgruntled former analyst with access to classified archives has stolen and disseminated government secrets. This individual is now a threat to national security. His photo appeared beside the headline, "Domestic hacker behind massive intelligence breach." His former colleagues gave no official comment. Cameras hovered outside their homes, waiting for sound bites, but off the record, many whispered doubts. The details in the leaked files, they matched too closely with anomalies Keane had pointed out during his years inside. Quietly, some admitted they believed the documents were real. And among the noise, one woman stood apart, Sarah Voss. She wasn't just another journalist. She'd been blacklisted from major networks years ago for her relentless questioning of the official 9/11 story. She'd chased down whispers in parking garages, secret recordings, and dead-end leads. Most dismissed her as a fringe investigator, but some in the intelligence community respected her for one thing: she never stopped digging. Now, as she read through the newly leaked memos and logs, her eyes narrowed. She recognized the tone, the phrasing, the bureaucratic fingerprints. These weren't fakes. They aligned with fragments she'd encountered before, in backroom conversations, and anonymous envelopes that never made it to publication. She didn't hesitate. Through an encrypted Dropbox on the site hosting the files, she sent a message. "I can help verify. Let me speak to the source." That message, bouncing across proxies and coded relays, eventually landed in the inbox of an online confidant of Keane's, someone he'd trusted for years. A day later, in the cold silence of the forest, Thomas read it on his secure laptop, the glow of the screen, the only light in the cabin. He stared at her name for a long while, then he began to type. His reply was brief, but layered in encryption. "Let's talk. The story's bigger than you know. I have the evidence." The real race had begun. Could he trust her enough to reveal more? Could she bring this to the public without endangering them both? And more urgently, could they move fast enough before the government's counterintelligence machine crushed them? The system was already in motion. 2 days after the leak, the national discourse was in chaos. The government doubled down. Their narrative was sharp and unwavering. The black dust documents were a fabrication, sophisticated propaganda, designed to destabilize American unity. But smaller media sites weren't buying it. They started running side-by-side comparisons, standard CIA formatting, document metadata, file chain markers, all consistent with legitimate intelligence. Documents, the public was split. Some clung to the safety of the official story, unwilling to accept that 20 years of war, fear, and loss might have been engineered. Others were rocked to their core. If what Keane released was real, then everything, the justification for conflict, the erosion of civil liberties, had been based on a manufactured lie. Meanwhile, Keane's name was all over national watch lists. Every camera feed, every facial recognition scan was being run through updated databases. His past, once a footnote, was now being rewritten in real time by the same agency that once employed him. Reporters were told he was unstable, that he had a history of erratic behavior and fringe beliefs. What they didn't mention was that some of those fringe beliefs had almost triggered internal investigations years ago, until higher-ups had buried them. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, just outside DC, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of a modest home. 4 men in grey suits stepped out without words. No badges, no warrants. The man inside was a data engineer, retired, formerly worked with Keane on back-end systems. They told him it was routine. They entered his house, ordered him to unlock his computer. They combed through his emails, his files, his search history, anything that might mention Thomas, or black dust, or encrypted folders. They left with a portable drive and a warning not to speak of the visit. This wasn't an isolated incident. The same thing happened at the homes of several former FBI employees who had once shared projects or lunchroom conversations with Keene. None of them had been accused publicly. None of them had legal recourse. The watchers didn't answer to courts. They answered to Eldridge Shaw. From the 51st floor of a polished black glass tower in Langley, Shaw surveyed the manhunt. The newly formed Central Intelligence Security Directorate, a consolidated intelligence agency born in the wake of the 9/11 chaos, was his empire. He had built it through years of calculated moves, pushing the Patriot Act, expanding surveillance powers, securing lucrative defense contracts. He remembered the day of the attacks clearly. The horror, yes, but also the opportunity. Now, 2 decades later, that foundation was under siege by a leak that dared to tell the truth. Shaw stood with his hands behind his back, watching a digital map light up with red markers, potential sightings, phone pings, social posts. "Find him," he said calmly to his assistant. "Reeve, Keene, whatever name he's using. It doesn't matter." He turned to face his staff. "We cannot let one man's fantasy dismantle 2 decades of progress. You understand me? This is not about him. This is about everything we've built since that day. This is about the story. And the story cannot change." As the nationwide manhunt intensified, Thomas Keene kept to the shadows, always just out of reach. He avoided highways whenever possible. He knew the drill: checkpoints, license plate scanners, state troopers pretending not to watch too closely. He had already switched vehicles twice, burned through one fake identity, and was now operating under the name of a long-dead college classmate. Cities were a no-go. Too many cameras, too many eyes. His days blurred into one another. Granola bars, gas station bathrooms, and convenience store meals paid for in wrinkled cash. Nights were spent in budget motels off forgotten exits, the kind where the air always smelled faintly of mildew and the front desk clerk never asked questions. He always picked a room facing the lot so he could see if an unmarked SUV came screeching in. He kept a bag packed and slept in half-hour intervals, gun under his pillow. The pressure was eating him alive. Then came the message from Sarah Voss. Her name made his breath catch. An investigative reporter who'd built a reputation in the murky world of alternative media. She was one of the few who hadn't laughed off the leaks. "We need to meet," she wrote via an encrypted chat app. "I can help verify these files. People trust me, at least enough. But we have to move fast. The window's closing." Keene stared at the message for a long time. Meeting face to face was risky. Every move left a trail, but if they didn't do this, the documents would die in the noise. Just another dismissed conspiracy theory. He finally typed, "Tomorrow, off-grid location, after hours, Coastal Library. I'll confirm time midday." The next evening, Keene parked a few blocks from the small-town library. The place was quiet, too quiet. He noticed a dark sedan idling near the lot. No markings, tinted windows. His pulse quickened. Could be a civilian. Could be one of them. He circled the block, slow and casual. When he passed by again, the sedan hadn't moved. Could be nothing, he whispered to himself, trying to believe it. He parked and walked to the building, every step tightening his chest. The library's old brick exterior loomed under yellow parking lights, soft shadows flickering across the steps. Inside, Sarah Voss was waiting. She looked taller in person, her leather jacket worn and creased at the shoulders. Her eyes met his, sharp and calculating. She reached out a hand. "Thomas?" she asked, her voice low and steady. He nodded. "You're the only one I can trust right now." They sat near the back, tucked between shelves of forgotten encyclopedias and dusty travel guides. The fluorescent light above flickered. "I've seen enough of the documents to know the official narrative's full of holes," Sarah said, keeping her voice just above a whisper. "But we need to make this airtight, undeniable. Keen slid. A USB drive across the table. His hands trembled slightly. "This is the full set," he said. "Memos about the stand-down orders, internal communications between defense contractors, altered flight data, emails referring to the hijackers as rogue assets." He hesitated, then swallowed hard. They didn't just fail to stop it, they used it. For contracts, wars, control. Sarah stared at him, then opened her laptop and scanned a few of the files. Her eyes widened. "Operation Silence. Offshore accounts. Transfer ledgers," she murmured. "This is massive, but we can't just post it on my site. They'll suppress it, discredit it. We need something big, public." She looked up, brows drawn. A live event, a real broadcast, or a mainstream journalist who hasn't sold their soul yet. A loud thump near the library entrance made both of them jump. They froze. Someone outside, shadowy and still, was peering through. The glass doors. Sarah snapped her laptop shut. Keen reached instinctively toward his waistband, heart pounding. They crouched behind the nearest shelf. Heavy footsteps echoed. Then, "Evening, folks!" The library's old caretaker ambled in, oblivious to the tension in the air. He waved, cheerfully, and headed toward the back room. Keen peered through the shelf. The dark figure at the door was gone. Had he imagined it? Or had the visitor decided they weren't alone? "False alarm?" Sarah asked. Maybe. Maybe not. They didn't wait to find out. They agreed to meet again in 48 hours outside a local news station rumored to have a rebellious editor still clinging to journalistic ideals. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, they'd get their message out before it was too late. That night, Keen sat in his rented room, staring at the buzzing burner phone on the nightstand. A new message. "One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. Doesn't add up. They're coming after us. Stay dark." The sender was a friend from his old air traffic analysis days. One of the few people who had helped him understand the logs, helped piece together the true timeline. Then another ping. Message deleted. Keen dropped the phone. His hands shook. His breathing felt shallow, ragged. "They're silencing everyone," he whispered, one by one. The stakes were higher than ever. The world outside was already boiling over. Protests had started flaring in cities. People demanding transparency. Others accusing protesters of dishonoring the dead. Social media was a battlefield, flooded with theories and takedowns. The government responded with fire. Director Shaw appeared on national television, his voice cold and precise. "We will not tolerate the spread of unfounded conspiracy theories meant to destabilize our nation. Agitators will be held accountable." Behind the scenes, Sarah kept digging. Somewhere deep in the files, she found a strange reference. The Saturn files. It wasn't just a name, it was a ledger, an intelligence-grade archive tracking post-attack financial flows. Black budget allocations, offshore shell companies, private ownership links. She followed threads that led from government emergency funds directly into shadow networks, names with no faces, power with no public record. It wasn't just about letting a tragedy happen, it was about building an empire on its ashes. If they could find where the Saturn files were stored, it would be the key, the irrefutable money trail behind the war expansions. No more theories, no more speculation. Just cold, hard numbers tying government officials, private contractors, and corporate giants to the carnage. That ledger could shatter the official narrative for good. But time was slipping through their fingers. The manhunt grew vicious. Helicopters prowled remote highways, search checkpoints sprang up overnight, and random car stops became common. The air felt taut with anxiety. People were scared, but more than that, they were beginning to sense the fear in the government. And that fear made it real. Keen kept moving, motel to motel, altering his appearance each time. Beards, shaved heads, colored contacts, old man hunches, delivery driver uniforms. He became whoever he had to, but luck never lasts forever. Sooner or later, he'd have to stop running and put everything on the line. He just hoped public outrage would be loud enough to shield him when that time came. What he didn't know was that the watchers were already closing in. No more vague surveillance or quiet tailing. A full Black Ops team had been deployed. Their orders: find the leak, erase all traces, and silence the source. For good. If Keane couldn't stay one step ahead long enough to expose the Saturn files, everything would vanish under layers of official denial and convenient accidents. But if he could, if he got it out in time, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would bring the entire post-attack governance structure crashing down. The following week became a rhythm of paranoia and purpose. By day, Keane evaded the watchers, using burner phones, walking routes designed to expose tails, doubling back, ducking into alleys. At night, he and Sarah Voss met in abandoned houses, forgotten diners, or borrowed safe houses, each meeting more desperate than the last. "We're close," Sarah whispered one night over the glow of her laptop. Her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, her fingers trembling from too much caffeine and too little safety. She had found something. Scattered references in old, decrypted CIA memos. Mentions of Saturn archive. Allegedly, it was an encrypted ledger detailing how billions in emergency funds were funneled to defense firms, oil companies, and election campaigns in the chaotic weeks following the attacks. If true, it confirmed what they'd feared. The motive wasn't incompetence, it was profit. Endless war as an investment strategy. They stayed up late in a safe house, a rundown farmhouse lent to them by one of Sarah's old contacts. Rain drummed on the sagging roof as they pored over fragments of data, stringing together digital breadcrumbs. Then, a breakthrough. "I think I found something," Sarah said, voice low and urgent. "There's a reference here, coordinates that match an old NSA site, somewhere in the southwest. Officially decommissioned, but it might still have backups," Keane finished. He stared at the screen, feeling his pulse in his neck. "That's where the Saturn files are. We find that archive," she said, looking at him squarely, "and we rip the mask off everything." Keane nodded, but the idea of infiltrating a federal compound with nothing more than outdated schematics, 2 laptops, and a backpack of survival gear made his stomach twist. They had next to nothing. A battered used car, about $3,000 in cash, and some gear scavenged from past contacts. The watchers, they had drones, AI tracking, agents with limitless clearance, and real-time data from practically every camera in the country. But maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't expect them to break into a forgotten desert facility. Back in DC, director Eldridge Shaw took center stage, tightening the screws on public perception. The narrative was being shaped with surgical precision. Thomas Keane, rogue former intelligence analyst, working with foreign actors to spread misinformation and destabilize the homeland. It played well on the news. Many people swallowed it whole, but a growing minority didn't. And then the accident started. A cybersecurity researcher was found drowned in his bathtub. A known archivist was shot during what the media called a botched robbery, despite nothing being stolen. Whispers began to circulate. "If it's all fake," one viral post asked, "why are they killing the people connected to it?" On the streets, tension boiled over. In city squares from Seattle to St. Louis, protesters held handmade signs. "We deserve the truth. Stop killing whistleblowers. Saturn is real." Police cracked down hard. Mass arrests, tear gas, rubber, bullets. Protesters were labelled agitators and detained under new emergency laws. Social media feeds were throttled. Hashtags buried, but the anger was harder to kill than the truth. Meanwhile, Keane tried to keep his mind clear. Focus was all he had left. "If the Saturn files really exist," he told Sarah one night, "and we can tie that money to post-attack legislation, actual bank transfers into political super PACs, corporate bribes to swing defense votes, then the whole thing collapses." "No wonder they're trying to erase us," Sarah muttered, rubbing her eyes. They switched identities again. More fake IDs. Cross-country travel on forgotten roads. Motels paid for in cash and visited only once. They never stayed anywhere long, enough for the heat to catch up. The watchers probably guessed they were chasing something more, but with so many possible targets, they couldn't know for sure. That bought time, but not much. Tension between them simmered. Not anger, just pressure. The kind that builds when two people are racing against a clock while the walls close in. The air felt heavy with unsaid fears. Exhaustion set into their bones. They weren't sleeping much. They weren't eating enough. Meanwhile, the state tightened its grip. News anchors repeated government talking points in endless loops. Turn in Thomas Keane. Reward $500,000. Billboards with his face, older, photoshopped to look even more menacing, popped up along major interstates. Surveillance drones circled protest areas. Toll booth cameras flashed at random. Even grocery stores began scanning plates in the parking lot. Keane knew his time was limited. But the Saturn files might still be sitting out there, buried in some forgotten server rack beneath the dust of a desert sky. They had to try. They had to move. He wore a low-brimmed baseball cap and dark-tinted glasses, but even with the disguise, every day felt like playing Russian roulette. One bad turn, one wrong glance, and it could all end. On a quiet back road outside the city, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. Fast, aggressive. Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "They're back," Keane said quietly, eyes fixed behind them. Sarah didn't wait. She jerked the wheel to the right, tires screeching as the car veered off the paved road onto a narrow, dusty path through a stretch of farmland. Dirt flew in clouds behind them as they barreled between fields, engine groaning. The SUV followed. A sharp crack shattered the air. Gunfire. The rear tire exploded. The car lost balance, spun out of control, and slammed into a shallow ditch. Sarah and Keane barely had time to grab their bags before diving out. They didn't look back, just ran. The cornfields ahead rose like a wall, tall, thick, swaying in the wind. They darted in, weaving through rows, breathing hard, the stalks slapping their faces. Behind them, doors slammed and boots hit the ground. Shouts, footsteps, then nothing. The corn muffled everything. Minutes passed. The sound of their hearts thundered in their ears. Eventually, the noise faded. The footsteps retreated. The watchers must have decided it wasn't worth the risk. A gunfight in open country might draw too much attention. Hidden among the corn, Keane wiped sweat from his face, hands trembling. "They were ready to kill us," he said. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "That means we're close. They're scared of what we'll find." They waited until sunset before moving again. Days later, they arrived at the old NSA outpost. The place was dead quiet, more graveyard than facility. It stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by scrubland and a crumbling fence barely held, up by rust. A few no trespassing signs hung crookedly, paint peeled and unreadable. The asphalt lot was cracked like old skin, choked with weeds. Nature was taking the place back. Sarah stared at it in silence. Perfect place to hide a secret. They found a corner of the fence already peeled back, likely by looters. Slipping through, they moved with care. The main structure loomed ahead, its windows boarded up. Twisted rebar stuck out from crumbled walls. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, and the wind carried a faint metallic whistle from a broken vent. Inside, dust blanketed everything. The place smelled of mildew, rust, and forgotten time. Cubicles sat frozen in disarray, monitors dark, papers scattered on the floor like leaves in a breeze. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the gloom as they moved deeper. Finally, they found it, a subterranean wing sealed off by a thick, metal door. Old servers lined the hall, some still faintly beeping under emergency power. Sarah stopped, uneasy. "There's still power," Keane muttered. "That's not right," Sarah whispered. "Someone's been here." They came to a locked door labelled Server Vault, Archive 6. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a photo, one of the stolen documents they'd recovered. It had a partial code printed in faded ink. Using an app, she generated a bypass sequence, trying it on the keypad. First, try, nothing. Second, still red. Third, the light turned green. A hiss, then a heavy clunk as the door creaked open. Inside, rows of metal shelves lined with dusty drives, reel tapes, and server towers filled the vault. Despite the age, some servers hummed faintly. A gentle vibration buzzed under their feet. From low-powered climate control, they scanned labels. Cast peak, post-K war roster. Sarah read aloud. Then Keem pointed. Here. A battered cluster of servers was labelled in faded tape. Saturn FSV. Keem connected a terminal to their laptop and powered it on. The screen glowed dimly, restricted. Saturn. 1243. Enter passwords. Era typed quickly, trying keywords based on what they'd found in the documents. Third attempt. Access granted. The screen filled with files. Pages of internal memos, encrypted. Transfers and classified reports scrolled by. What the hell is this? Sarah breathed. Huge sums of money rerouted into covert ops. Records of building demolitions. Insider trading logs, all dated days before the attack. The further they read, the darker it got. Bureaucrats, banks, even media figures. All tied in. A masterfully orchestrated event to manipulate fear, pass sweeping war budgets, and funnel billions into private defense contracts. They used the attack, Sarah said, stunned. They knew. They let it happen. Even used known assets as pawns. Keem just stared at the screen, jaw clenched. This can't stay buried. Then, footsteps. Above. Boots. Multiple pairs. They're here, Sarah whispered. Keem launched. The data transfer to multiple external drives. We copy everything. Now. Sarah moved quickly, killing the lights and ducking behind a terminal. Flashlights pierced the darkness. Go! Go! Voices echoed as the watchers rushed in. Gunfire ripped through the silence. Metal pinged as bullets struck server racks. Sarah returned fire with the small pistol she always kept in her jacket. Sparks danced as shots ricocheted. Keem crouched over the laptop, connecting a portable satellite router. Upload 10%. Then, a new voice thundered through the metal corridor. Stop! Director Shaw stepped into view, flanked by armed guards. His suit was soaked in sweat, his eyes burning with fury. You have no idea what you're about to unleash, he yelled. Entire alliances will fall. You think the world's ready for this kind of truth? Sarah's shoulder jolted as a bullet, grazed her. Blood soaked into her sleeve. She didn't flinch, kept firing, keeping the watchers back. Upload 50%. Shaw barked an order. One of the watchers pulled something from his vest. A small canister. Flashbang, Keem shouted. The blast went off. White light, deafening roar. Ears rang. Vision blurred. They didn't have time to recover. One guard tackled Sarah to the ground. Another slammed into Keem, sending him sprawling. The laptop crashed under a boot. Screen cracked. The upload froze at 80%. No, no, no! Keem yelled, struggling. In a last burst of desperation, he grabbed the broken laptop and smashed it into the face of the guard pinning him. The man collapsed backward, dazed. By some miracle, the laptop jolted. Screen flickered. The upload resumed. Alive again. The watchers surged forward, trying to rip out the data cables before the upload could complete. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. In the chaos, a stray bullet struck a coolant pipe running along the wall. There was a sharp hiss, then a plume of steam burst out under pressure. The temperature inside the server room spiked instantly. Fall back. That line's ruptured, one of the watchers shouted. A moment of fear passed through the infiltration team. The entire system, old, unstable, might go critical at any second. The floor trembled with a low rumble. Smoke began to curl from the control panels. Shaw pushed forward anyway, his pistol raised, eyes locked on Keem, who was bleeding and slumped near the terminal. You can die here with your delusions, Shaw said, voice hard with contempt. Or vanish quietly. Either way. The truth dies with you. Keem glared up at him through bloodied eyes. The truth already left the building. Suddenly, one of the coolant tanks exploded. A massive plume of vapor shot upward. Lighting arced across a panel, and the backup power grid overloaded. The whole room flickered with a brief, eerie light, then erupted. Fire roared along the ceiling, licking down the walls like something alive. The watchers scattered, screaming. Sarah, dazed and coughing, crawled behind a cabinet, shielding her face from the heat. Her arm throbbed from the gunshot wound. Sparks rained from overhead conduits. Amid the chaos, Keem, his body shaking, his vision swimming, saw the upload bar sitting at 98%. He gritted his teeth. Come on, come on. With a defiant roar, he slammed his bloodied palm onto the keyboard, hitting the final confirm key. The system emitted a soft beep. Upload complete. At that moment, everything changed. The watchers paused. Then their eyes widened as they realized what it meant. The data was out, sent, irreversible. Even if they destroyed the room, even if they killed everyone in it, it didn't matter anymore. One of them raised his weapon and fired. The shot punched into Keem's chest. He slumped against the server rack, blood pouring down his shirt, eyes still on the screen. The glow reflected in his lifeless stare. They yanked the cables, hoping to stop something, anything, but it was already too late. The Saturn files were gone, presumably received by a secure node somewhere across the open web. The facility's alarm system screamed to life. Red strobes lit up the smoke-filled corridor. Automated voices echoed. Warning. System failure. Structural integrity compromised. Another explosion rocked the sublevel. Concrete cracked overhead. Sarah was blown backward by the concussive force, slamming against a wall. She tried to stand but couldn't find her footing. Dust choked the air. Shaw, bleeding from a cut above his eye, yelled at his men. Get out! Now! The watchers dragged him back as the servers sparked and the ceiling began to cave in. Flames engulfed the sub-basement. The floor gave way. With a final roar, the vault collapsed into itself. Keem was gone, but his mission wasn't. Within hours, the world changed. The Saturn files surfaced online, first in obscure corners of the web, then mirrored by anonymous hacktivists, journalists, archivists. Links spread like wildfire. Social media platforms tried to block them. Governments issued denials. But it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper dam. Screenshots, PDFs, scans, video clips, leaked memos, everything. Original documents cited. Operation White Dome and Project Switchboard. Internal memos described collusion between senior officials and radical groups. Plans to trigger panic. Civilian casualties weighed and deemed strategically acceptable. Each file had digital fingerprints, timestamps, user logs, old encryption keys. Independent cybersecurity experts verified their authenticity. Cross-referenced names, actions, and dates matched perfectly with known events. The backlash was immediate. US allies demanded answers. European leaders called emergency summits. China and Russia demanded a UN Security Council meeting. Protests erupted across capital cities, with people carrying signs that read, "We were never safe," and "Justice for the truth." Back in the US, the fallout was apocalyptic. Footage of top officials casually discussing potential civilian death tolls ignited fury. Thousands gathered outside the Capitol. Massive rallies flooded downtown DC, New York, Los Angeles. Families of attack victims wept in front of cameras. Corporations tied to defense contracts saw their stock nosedive. CEOs stepped down. Lawsuits poured in. One board of directors dissolved overnight after internal emails showed they'd profited directly from manipulated terror alerts. Mid-level intelligence officers, unable to bear the weight of silence, stepped forward. Whistleblowers confirmed the file's authenticity. Some broke down on live television, others disappeared. Director: Shaw attempted damage control with a national press conference, flanked by uniformed officers and American flags. He didn't get 2 sentences in before a chorus of boos drowned him out. "Traitor!" someone screamed. He tried again. "This is a coordinated attack on our institutions by..." Bottles flew. Shaw's security team rushed him off stage. Hours later, his office declared a national security emergency, urging martial law. That backfired. Several states outright refused federal orders. Governors made public statements condemning Washington. National Guard units hesitated. In some cities, police stood aside as protesters flooded government buildings. TV anchors, once loyal to the official narrative, made somber apologies. Others clung to patriotic rhetoric, spinning the leaks as foreign sabotage. But the evidence was overwhelming. People weren't buying it. One commentator summed it up best: "You can't put the truth back in the box. The entire post-attack world order has been cracked wide open. No one knew what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain: the truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again." Over the following weeks, the old alignment of power began to fracture. Investigations launched from multiple fronts. Emboldened lawmakers pressed charges against those who had orchestrated the post-attack. Expansions for personal and political gain. Congressional subcommittees, civilian review boards, and international tribunals converged in a rare synchronized reckoning. From the ruins of the Southwestern fiasco, Sarah Voss emerged. Battered, burned but alive, she recounted how the Watchers had infiltrated the abandoned NSA site and how Thomas Keane had died a hero, finalizing the data upload amid chaos. Her op-ed, "One Man's Last Key Press," told of smoke and blood, of a single keystroke that no bullet could stop. The column went viral, immortalizing Keane as a tragic whistleblower who gave everything for the truth. The public reeled. Families of 9/11 victims demanded new trials. The credibility of past commissions crumbled. Decades of sealed, contradictory evidence surfaced. Even original investigators admitted they'd been misled, manipulated, or threatened. The emotional toll was seismic. A nation relived its greatest trauma under a horrifying new lens. How did fear become so profitable? And how did good people let it happen? Across the world, US allies withdrew support from contested war zones. Foreign parliaments opened their own investigations, suspecting complicity in the deception. The post-attack world order unraveled, replaced by an uncertain new era. Some hoped this signaled a shift toward diplomacy. Others feared chaos and extremism would fill the vacuum. And then came the whispers. What if Thomas Keane survived? Rumors flared. Sightings in distant villages. Encrypted forum posts. Grainy surveillance stills. But no body, no confirmation. Officially, he was presumed dead. If he lived, perhaps anonymity was his final act of rebellion. 6 months later, the Senate convened a historic hearing. Former generals, defense contractors, and high-ranking officials, many retired, some still clinging to power, were subpoenaed. Televised nationally, the hearings transfixed the world. Some pled the Fifth, others invoked national security. Few cracked, offering fragmented confessions. Indictments followed. Not all led to convictions. The system was vast, fortified by decades of obfuscation. But symbolically, it was seismic. Never again would the official story go unchallenged. At the same time, Sarah Voss launched an independent media platform, False Skies. Unfiltered, unbound by corporate sponsors, it became a hub for testimony, leaked documents, and suppressed histories. Freed from blacklists, Sarah became a public force, an anchor of accountability in a storm of doubt. A year after the Saturn Files breach, a new memorial rose near Ground Zero. A solitary statue, a figure mid-motion, finger pressing a single key. Beneath it, an inscription carved in steel. They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light. Visitors came in silence. Some left flowers, others letters. Some stood for hours, simply staring, as if searching for closure in the bronze contours of sacrifice. In a quiet coastal town, a weathered fisherman claimed he recognized a man from a viral photo. Older now, hair sun-bleached, eyes hollow with memory. The man said little, just that he had once worked for a government that mistook control for safety. He spoke of illusions, of the cost of shattering them. At dawn, he vanished. In his place, a single battered flash drive. Was it Thomas Keane? No one knows. But if it was, he had chosen a different kind of legacy. Not fame, not power, just silence, and the ripple it leaves behind. Public trust in large institutions remains shaken. Some remain furious. Others dare to hope that from the ashes of deception, a new age of transparency might rise. Conspiracy forums still speculate about the watchers, whether they're regrouping, planning another false flag. But for now, the greatest deception of the modern age has been laid bare. The name Black Dust endures, not as a code or project, but as a warning, a monument to what happens when fear governs, unchecked. In the hush that follows, a final truth lingers. They used fear to shape the world. But one day, fear lost. The truth soared free, and the illusions that once cloaked the skies were shattered in a single day.